Chapter 2758, Bible of Darkness's True Power. Upon hearing Shifeng's words, Solitary 9, Lifeless Thorn, and Yenyu promptly stopped attracting Tedelia's attention and dashed over to Shifeng. They chose to run to him because only their commander had a way to hold Tedelia back. If they ran in any other direction, Tedelia would definitely chase them down and crush them. Tedelia strode toward Shifeng step by step. Not only did Tedelia shake the ground with every step it took, but the mental influence it exerted over the rest of the team also increased. Some of the resting players, such as Blue Gown, even started holding their heads in pain. Are we going to fight it? Illusory words couldn't help frowning at this situation. She simply couldn't see any way for their team to defeat Tedelia. Not only did Tedelia possess over 2 billion HP, but its combat standard was superior to ordinary refinement realm experts. Its speed was so fast that even a domain realm expert like herself could barely keep up. Such speed simply wasn't something Tier 3 players could cope with, and even a Tier 4 player like Shifeng would, at best, just match its speed. Moreover, Tedelia's strength was something only Tier 4 MTs could hope to stop. If a swordsman like Shifeng tried to tank one of the Realm Lord's attacks, he would definitely end up miserable. However, when Tedelia was only 3 steps away from Shifeng, the connections completed. Shifeng smiled as he closed the Bible of Darkness and looked at Tedelia. Let's start the second round, then. As soon as Shifeng closed the Bible of Darkness, the stormy skies above the valley shattered and transformed into a dark space covering thousands of yards. Looking at the darkness, everyone present could faintly sense that it was connected to an ancient and terrifying space. Just the aura leaking out from the dark space was enough to roil the valley's mana. The next moment, a gigantic stone door several hundred meters tall fell through the dark space and smashed into the valley, causing powerful tremors to spread throughout the valley. When Tedelia looked at this ancient door, a deep sense of fear appeared in its eyes. How can there be such a terrifying existence in this world? Unyielding Heart was shocked as he looked at the massive stone door before him. This door was undoubtedly the most terrifying item he had seen in God's domain thus far. Just looking at it allowed him to understand just how scary it was. Every magic pattern and rune engraved on the door functioned to seal its power. Whatever existence stood behind the door could most likely obliterate him with just a small strand of its power. For a moment, he even had the feeling that the opening of this door would mark the beginning of all disasters. He's not planning to open this door, right? Illusory words eyed the stone door nervously. The door before her looked far too ominous. Its appearance alone filled her with an indescribable aversion and terror, a terror easily 100 times stronger than the fear she felt for Tedelia. However, before Illusory words could continue this line of thought, the door began opening by itself slowly. Darkness, silence, and despair. For a moment, it felt as if all the negative emotions in the world were pouring out of this stone door, and even Shifeng felt uncomfortable in this situation. As for everyone else, their faces paled, and they knelt on the ground involuntarily, none of them daring to look at the stone door directly. Who, mans? No. You're not. Suddenly, words spoken in the abstruse demonic language flowed out of the door. Although none of the players present were knowledgeable of the language of demons, they understood what the spoken words conveyed. For a time, everyone was confused. I never thought that after so many years, you existences would be the next to summon this door. Following these words, a 3-eyed, 10-meter-tall, humanoid demon clad in black armor walked out of the stone door. The instant Tedelia saw this demon, horror overwhelmed it. It was as if the Realm Lord had just seen death itself. Actually, Shifeng himself felt dread at the humanoid demon's appearance. He never dreamed he would summon this demon. The Dark Abyss had a total of 108 demon princes, who stood at the peak of the great demons. All of them were existences second only to demon kings, and they could be considered half-step demon kings. Meanwhile, the humanoid demon standing before him was Ferbero, the Lord of the Dead. His strength ranked 21st among all great demons. Weak. How weak? Ferbero muttered as he looked at himself, his voice filled with dissatisfaction. He then looked at Shifeng, who held the Bible of Darkness, and said coldly, "You should know what you have done. That book isn't something you should possess, so hand it to me. This is also your only way out. Otherwise, what awaits you is eternal death." As soon as Ferbero finished speaking, a powerful sense of oppression descended on Shifeng, one so uncomfortable that his expression turned ugly. As expected of one of the 108 demon princes. Its mental oppression is on par with Tier 5 existences, Shifeng sighed ruefully. Although he had long since known that the gap between Tier 4 and Tier 5 was massive, he still couldn't help feeling helpless when experiencing the might of a half-step demon king. Luckily, Shifeng wielded the Bible of Darkness, which restricted the methods Ferbero could use to target him. Otherwise, the demon prince could have killed him instantly. Meanwhile, as Ferbero subjected Shifeng to his mental oppression, the Bible of Darkness also sensed the offense. Immediately, chains appeared around the demon prince's body. The instant these chains appeared, Ferbero's mental oppression weakened drastically. Now, the mental oppression no longer posed any threat to Shifeng whatsoever. This damned contract. I will break free from this binding one day and obtain true freedom. Ferbero bellowed in rage as he glared at the pitch-black chains wrapped around his body. He then looked at Shifeng and said coldly, "Although that book prevents me from doing anything to you, don't think that you have full control over me. I can tell that you don't have much time left, based on those curses and bindings on your body. That book cannot save you. Only I can help you. That won't be necessary. I will only become your puppet if I believe you," Shifeng said, shaking his head while smirking contemptuously. After reaching Tier 4, he had gained an inkling about the problem plaguing his soul. Initially, he thought that with the benefits from his promotion, the problems he faced would stabilize. However, it turned out that wasn't the case at all. His problems were far greater than he imagined. This feeling became even more obvious after he had used the Bible of Darkness. The Bible of Darkness had been secretly eroding his soul all this time. He couldn't help but admit that this godlike item truly couldn't be controlled easily. It was much more dangerous than magic weapons. However, it was also impossible for him to abandon the Bible of Darkness. The road to reaching higher tiers was incredibly difficult. Only by grasping every available opportunity would he have a chance of becoming a god. Otherwise, everything he did would be for naught. One example would be the soul mark he received from a faux saint devourer he defeated some time ago. It was precisely because he had exploited this opportunity that he had managed to strengthen his soul, which, in turn, strengthened his resistance to that mysterious NPC's soul curse. Otherwise, he wouldn't have survived until now. Shifeng then looked at Ferbero and said, "I might not be able to control you completely, but you should know that as your summoner, I can forcibly control part of your power." The Bible of Darkness was his greatest assurance in venturing to the ruined mountain range this time. Venturing deep into the neutral map with just his personal strength was impossible. After all, Deity alone was already more than enough to make him flee. You'll regret this. Controlling the power of demons is beyond you. The more you use it, the deeper you will sink, until eventually your soul is consumed completely. Thank you for the warning, but don't think you demons will have an easy time devouring me. After saying so, Shifeng used the Bible of Darkness to erase Ferbero's consciousness and gain control over a portion of the demon prince's strength. A level 135 demon prince. Even with just 70% of Ferbero's strength, he could roam about the ruined mountain range's outer area without any worries. The conversation between Shifeng and Ferbero lasted for only a short moment. Hence, Deity, who had been petrified by the stone door and the Lord of the Dead, was still idle. However, after Shifeng took control of Ferbero's body, Deity immediately noticed something amiss. The demon prince's aura and mental oppression had weakened significantly. Moreover, Ferbero could display hostility toward it now. After realizing what had just happened, Deity pounced on Shifeng without hesitation, sending one of its mountain-sized claws smashing ruthlessly at the tiny human. Shifeng immediately felt as if the space around him had compressed 100-fold. Not only did his body feel a lot heavier, but even time had started slow. Tier 4 innate skill, Sundering Earth. This was the first time Delia had resorted to a skill. Previously, when fighting ants like Lifeless Thorn, it couldn't even be bothered to use skills. However, the only thing on its mind right now was to kill Shifeng as quickly as possible. Under intense pressure from the space around him, Shifeng looked up at Delia and smiled. "You're too late." Even before Shifeng finished speaking, Ferbero, who stood in front of Shifeng, waved his hand abruptly, and a pitch-black spear of flames condensed in his hand. He then swung the spear at Delia's approaching claw. Although Ferbero's spear was made of flames, it did not feel scorching at all. On the contrary, it gave off an extreme chill that froze the surrounding space. Time itself seemed to freeze momentarily. Boom! Space shattered and turned into nothingness. The impact of the collision between the two attacks caused the ground to sink. With the exception of Shifeng, the resulting shockwave also sent everyone flying over 500 yards away and inflicted damage on them ranging between tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. As for Delia, its massive body shot backward over 100 yards, leveling the terrain in its path. The next moment, Illusory Words, Unyielding Heart, and the others, who got blown away, gaped in shock as they looked at Delia. Chapter 2759, Half-Step Demon King, is this the real trump card Black Flame has been hiding all this time? Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart were shocked as they stared at the three-eyed demon hovering proudly in the sky. At the same time, they revealed bitter smiles on their faces. Ferbero, Lord of the Dead, Demon Prince, level 135 HP 13 billion. They had long known that people like Shifeng would always keep a trump card hidden. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come to the dangerous ruined mountain range even though he had reached Tier 4. However, they never imagined that Shifeng's trump card would be this terrifying. The man had actually summoned a demon prince from the dark abyss and controlled it like a puppet to fight for him. A demon prince was an existence capable of rivaling Tier 5 existences. In terms of life rating, a demon prince was above even superior mythic monsters. Not to mention, Ferbero was even a demon prince with a title. Calling him a half-step demon king wouldn't be an exaggeration. If the various superpowers were to find out about this power, they would most likely have very ugly expressions on their faces. Any demon prince that possessed a title had earned their title by slaughtering countless people in God's domain. In fact, these titled demon princes were responsible for the destruction of some kingdoms in God's domain. For an existence capable of single-handedly destroying an entire kingdom, destroying a super guild's guild city would be child's play. In reality, Shifeng himself had also entertained the same fantasies as Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart. However, these thoughts remained merely thoughts. After his promotion to Tier 4, both his concentration and mana perception had gained a qualitative improvement. Thanks to these improvements, he discovered a small trace of dark energy lingering around his soul. The Bible of Darkness possessed incredible power. In fact, some legendary items would even seem weak compared to it. This situation was inconsistent with God's domain's rules. In God's domain, one had to pay a price corresponding to the power gained. This was the balance of God's domain. However, the Bible of Darkness didn't seem balanced to him. The power it offered its wielder was far greater than the cost of using it. Now, the Bible of Darkness's detriments were thoroughly revealed. His soul had become tainted with dark energy. Although the dark energy lingering around his soul was incredibly weak, its purity was exceptionally high, equal to the energy found in 7 luminaries crystals. Ordinary power couldn't expel it. And the more he used the Bible of Darkness's power, the stronger and purer this dark energy became. Particularly, when he summoned Ferbero, the rate at which this dark energy grew had skyrocketed. Hence, unless absolutely necessary, he didn't dare casually use the Bible of Darkness's power for now. Meanwhile, as everyone was stunned by Ferbero's power, Delia, who had been knocked backward, let loose a deafening roar like an enraged beast. Delia's originally translucent body turned blood red and enlarged significantly. Now, the Realm Lord easily reached a height of 50 meters. Simultaneously, a ripple of power spread from its body, reaching 500 yards away and causing the ground to sink. What a strong gravity domain! Shifeng frowned when Tedelia's gravity domain reached him. Despite his mana domain and tier 4 physique, moving inside Tedelia's gravity domain was actually difficult. Now, he couldn't even exhibit half of his normal speed, let alone his strength. If tier 3 players stood within this gravity domain right now, they would most likely be crushed to death. Fortunately, Ferbero, whom Shifeng controlled, wasn't particularly affected by this gravity domain. His speed and strength had been reduced by only 20% or so. He still held an advantage over Tedelia. So, this is the Demon Prince's power. Shifeng was astonished by this situation. Despite both him and Ferbero being tier 4 existences, there was a tremendous gap between them. He only had basic control over Ferbero's body, utilizing Ferbero's mana and frightening concentration was beyond him. While these two aspects might not seem very important, they were crucial for tier 4 existences to maximize the use of their basic attributes. At this time, Shifeng couldn't exhibit even 10% of Ferbero's true combat power. Despite that, Ferbero could still overwhelm Tedelia. All Shifeng needed to do now was control Ferbero and have the Demon Prince pin down the Soul Singer. If everyone else helped out in attacking Tedelia, slaying the superior Mythic wouldn't be impossible. However, Tedelia had no intention of letting Shifeng realize his plans. Chanting an incantation, the Realm Lord repeatedly shattered the ground around itself and gathered the scattered rubble. In just 3 seconds, a meteorite with a 400-yard radius had formed in midair. A tier 4 curse? Shifeng's complexion darkened when he saw the meteorite. A tier 4 curse cast by a superior mythic would possess power at the tier 5 standard. A single strike from such an attack was more than enough to demolish a city's defensive magic array. As a tier 4 player, if he got struck by this attack, he would die without question. At this time, let alone Shifeng, even Illusory Words, Unyielding Heart, and the other players standing over 500 yards away were stunned by Tedelia's attack. Helpless smiles appeared on their faces. Once this tier 4 curse landed, none of them would survive. They couldn't even interrupt the spell. Damn it! Why can't I use his mana? Shifeng felt a huge headache in this situation. If Ferbero were to rely on only his physical body, the Demon Prince definitely wouldn't be able to shrug off a tier 4 curse. Moreover, even if Ferbero could endure the attack, both Shifeng and the rest of his team couldn't. Escaping was also impossible at this point. After all, the activation of a tier 4 curse would place a seal on the space of the affected region. Aside from shattering the tier 4 curse directly, the only other way to survive a tier 4 curse would be to endure it. However, neither of these two options were viable for Shifeng. If he couldn't control Ferbero's mana, he wouldn't be able to use any of the Demon Prince's skills or spells, he could only have the Demon Prince fight hand to hand. While Shifeng was thinking about how to resolve this tier 4 curse, Tedelia completed the incantation for the tier 4 curse meteorite collapse. Boom! The next moment, the enormous meteorite that had taken shape fell from the sky like a real meteor. Damn it! Seeing the descending meteorite, Shifeng gritted his teeth and began calling the dark energy hidden in the depths of his soul. It's all or nothing now. As a tool capable of controlling all demons, the Bible of Darkness shouldn't be limited to turning demons into simple meat puppets. Shifeng believed it could exert further control over them. Meanwhile, a demon's power wasn't limited to just mana. They also had access to the terrifying power of darkness. In other words, the power of darkness was the source of strength for demons. Yet, when Shifeng used the Bible of Darkness, he could perform only simple manipulation of demons. This obviously didn't seem right. The instant Shifeng manipulated the strand of dark energy within his soul, it actually formed a connection with Ferbero's source of power. This is... Shifeng was stupefied. At this moment, he felt that he was Ferbero. He now could see what Ferbero saw and feel what Ferbero felt. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Is this what it feels like to be in existence approaching Tier 5 Demon Kings? Not only did Shi Feng not feel the slightest bit anxious or fearful of the descending meteorite, but it even looked like a toy to him. Be it the surrounding mana, terrain, or sky, he could now perceive everything with extreme clarity. Even the operating principles of the profound magic elements looked far less complex in his opinion. Meanwhile, just when everyone else on the team shook their heads and gave up, Ferbero suddenly raised a hand under Shi Feng's control and directed it at the massive meteorite. The next moment, a gigantic hand made of mana appeared out of thin air and grabbed the meteorite, then lightly squeezed. Boom! A deafening explosion occurred in midair, and the meteorite, which was over 400 meters in radius, instantly shattered into dust. Space around the hand also transformed into a black void. Chapter 2760, Illusory Sword Slays Realm Lord. The sky shattered, and the resulting void storm dyed the sky black as it threatened to devour everything on this land. The void storm was so powerful that even Tier 4 players would suffer severe damage or death if they got too close. So strong. He crushed a Tier 4 curse with his hand. Is he really just a Tier 4 demon? Everyone present gasped at the power of the demon prince Shi Feng controlled. Ferbero's might had thoroughly shattered their perception of Tier 4 demons in God's domain. In fact, even Shi Feng himself felt shocked by this outcome. Amazing! A demon prince can actually control mana to such a terrifying level. No wonder they're known as half-step demon kings. Their actual combat power is definitely at the Tier 5 standard. Previously, Shi Feng had merely thought to use Ferbero's mana to resist Tidelia's Tier 4 curse. However, the mana hand the demon prince conjured had actually shattered the Tier 4 curse. The demon prince's power was beyond his imagination. Nevertheless, the most amazing aspect about Ferbero would have to be the mana he could condense. The strength of the condensed mana surpassed even Shi Feng's mana when he executed Holy Devour. Meanwhile, Ferbero had already exhibited such astounding mana just by casually condensing it into the shape of a hand. Had the demon prince executed a mana technique just now, the result would have definitely been mind-blowing. The power of the attack might even reach the intermediate Tier 5 standard. Usually, if a superior mythic monster used a Tier 4 curse, the spell's power would only be at the entry level of Tier 5, not even reaching the basic Tier 5 standard. However, the mana hand Ferbero manifested just now was undoubtedly at the basic Tier 5 standard. If the attack's power reached the intermediate Tier 5 standard, the resulting spatial storm would have had a radius of several thousand yards instead of just several hundred yards. Shi Feng couldn't help reveling in Ferbero's power. After all, the feeling of wielding such power was simply wonderful. This was especially true for Ferbero's perception of and affinity for mana. When controlling the demon prince, Shi Feng could feel his comprehension of the operating principles of mana becoming a lot clearer than before. This wasn't a sensation he could experience with just an ordinary Tier 4 physique. If I can maintain this state, I can probably break through my mana body's 100% threshold in just 1 or 2 hours. My control of mana might even improve, and getting promoted to a Grandmaster Magician would be far less of a struggle. The gap in physique and life rating wasn't something that basic attributes could compensate for. If the effects of basic attributes on one's combat power were calculated by addition and subtraction, then the effects of physique and life rating would be calculated by multiplication and division. This was also why the dragon race stood at the apex of all races. Even with the same basic attributes, a dragon would be many times stronger than a human. For the same reason, dragons, fallen angels, and such creatures were invincible among those of the same tier, with some even capable of transcending tiers. Based on the power Ferbero displayed, the demon prince's life rating was probably close to rivaling dragons. However, as Shi Feng was savoring this wonderful moment, a stinging pain came from the depths of his mind. He paled in agony and almost staggered and fell to the ground. Sure enough, the system won't allow players to be immersed in this feeling for long. Shi Feng smiled bitterly when he sensed the state of his concentration and the taint on his soul. He had manipulated Ferbero's mana for less than 3 seconds, yet not only did he expend 10% of his concentration, but the dark energy in his soul had also grown significantly stronger. The corrosive effect of manipulating Ferbero's mana was 1/3 of summoning the demon prince himself. Meanwhile, Deity, who had initially cowered after seeing its Tier 4 curse shattered, narrowed its 6 eyes when it noticed the intensity of Shifeng's aura plummeting. It could tell that Shifeng was no longer in his best condition. Immediately, Deity's 3 heads began chanting another Tier 4 curse, intending to kill Shifeng while he was weakened. "Do you think I'll give you another chance?" Upon noticing Deity's actions, Shifeng connected the dark energy in his soul with Ferbero's source of darkness once more. Ferbero's aura recovered to its peak. The demon prince's aura was so terrifying that even Illusory words and the others, standing several hundred yards away, trembled reflexively. "Stay down." Shifeng had Ferbero brandish the fire spear without hesitation, gathering both mana and power of darkness for an attack. In addition, Shifeng even executed Light Shadow for this attack. However, as he was executing the mana technique indirectly, through Ferbero, he failed to execute the complete Light Shadow. Even so, the resulting attack was still magnitudes stronger than the earlier mana hand. The next moment, illusory spears rained down from the sky and bombarded Deity's heads. The attacks were so quick and powerful that the soul singer couldn't dodge them in time, its body getting pummeled into the ground. Cracks extending several thousand yards formed on the ground due to the impacts. The violent trembling of the earth toppled everyone on Shifeng's team and forced them to sit on the ground. By the time the land stopped shaking, a crater with a 300-yard radius had formed in Deity's position. As for the Realm Lord itself, its body had sunk several dozen meters into the ground, only its 3 heads remaining above ground. -1,165,446,428, a damage value exceeding 1 billion emerged slowly above Deity's head as its HP bar fell by a significant chunk. Even its life aura had weakened slightly. Crap. The commander is insane. He actually managed to summon such a demon. Solitary 9 was secretly astonished when he saw the damage and destruction Ferbero caused. At this rate, the fight could end in just another dozen hits or so. The boss monster that previously filled their minds with only thoughts of escape had been beaten down like a dog. The heavy injuries Deity suffered had also caused it to lose 30% of its basic attributes. There was simply no comparison between Deity and Ferbero. "Alright, stop daydreaming. All of you activate your berserk skills and fight the boss together with the demon prince. We must get rid of the boss now. Otherwise, none of us will get out alive." Shifeng ordered weakly through the team chat as he sat down on the ground. He had used his full power to launch that previous blow. He had even executed a partial Light Shadow. As a result, he had expended 30% of his concentration and further enhanced the dark energy in his soul. Now, he was in an incomparably weakened state, and just controlling Ferbero required all his focus. If they allowed Deity to recover and use another Tier 4 curse, they would team wipe. Hence, they needed to finish Deity while the Realm Lord was still weakened. They definitely could not afford to give it a chance to catch a breather. Upon hearing Shifeng's weak voice, Unyielding Heart immediately understood their situation. Hurriedly, he shouted through the team chat, "Everyone from Unyielding Soul, follow me. Everyone from Crimson Emperor, attack together. Activate your berserk skills." Illusory words also commanded her subordinates to take action. She, too, understood that now was not the time to hold back. Immediately, 20+ peak experts from Azura, Unyielding Soul, and Crimson Emperor activated their berserk skills and rushed toward Deity simultaneously. However, the Soul Singer also realized the precarious situation it was in right now. After dragging its heavily injured body out of the crater, it fled without hesitation. "Don't even think of getting away." Shifeng did not give Deity any opportunities to escape. Controlling Ferbero, he had the Demon Prince launch another attack at the Realm Lord. However, as Shifeng could execute only simple attacks with Ferbero right now, Deity managed to defend against the Demon Prince's attack despite being heavily injured. -94,376,414. A damage value nearing 100 million appeared above Tedelia's head when its claw collided with Ferbero's fire spear. Disregarding the damage, Tedelia immediately jumped into the air to flee. However, Shifeng was no ordinary expert but someone at the peak of the Ascension realm. Even though he was in a mentally weakened state and couldn't get Ferbero to exert his actual combat power, he could still use the Demon Prince to pin down Tedelia. Every one of the attacks he executed with Ferbero targeted Tedelia's vitals, forcing the Realm Lord to defend itself. Meanwhile, Unyielding Heart and the others arrived within attack range and immediately joined the battle. All of them possessed power rivaling Tier 4 mythic monsters. Although they still couldn't afford to face Tedelia in a frontal confrontation, the damage they inflicted was significant. The next moment, normal attacks dealing over 2 million damage each, coupled with the occasional Tier 3 skill reaping over 10 million damage, landed on the Realm Lord one after another. As Tedelia was already struggling to deal with Ferbero, it was utterly powerless against the 20-plus players' assault. It could only let the players bombard it with attacks as they pleased. 83%. 72%. 54%. Time passed quickly, with one side sticking close to the other. One side was fleeing desperately, while the other side was pursuing and attacking ruthlessly. Fortunately, Shifeng and the others dealt sufficiently high damage, dragging Tedelia's HP down continuously. After 3 minutes into the battle, Tedelia's HP hit 30%. However, at this time, the peak experts on Shifeng's team lost the Berserk skills effects one after another. Immediately, the team's overall DPS plummeted to just barely over Tedelia's battle recovery. At this rate, they wouldn't be able to finish the Realm Lord quickly. 10 minutes. 15 minutes. 20 minutes. When Tedelia's HP fell to 8%, its aura suddenly changed. The Realm Lord had finally recovered from its weakened state and was now back in peak condition. Die! Humans! Tedelia bellowed in human tongue, a hint of madness and contempt appearing in its eyes. It then began casting a Tier 4 curse. Damn it! We still didn't make it. Unyielding Heart's complexion sank when he saw another meteorite taking shape in the sky. They had fought for more than 20 minutes, yet they still failed to slay the weakened Tedelia. Now that the Realm Lord was casting another Tier 4 curse, the raid was as good as over. The one who's going to die is you. Some distance away from the battlefield, Shifeng stood up abruptly, a glimmer of light blooming in his eyes. He then manipulated the dark energy in his soul once more. Compared to the two previous instances, Shifeng was much more familiar with manipulating Ferbero's power this time. The next moment, Ferbero wielded his spear like a great sword and entered the stance for executing Light Shadow. The mana around the Demon Prince began rampaging. Simultaneously, an illusory sword 100 meters long appeared in midair. Die! Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. At this moment, Shifeng had exhausted every bit of concentration he had left to have Ferbero execute Light Shadow. Boom! The illusory sword descended instantly. For a moment, everyone even had the misconception that the sky had been split apart. 1 second later, Tedelia's 50-meter-tall body divided into two halves and collapsed to the ground. The Realm Lord's HP zeroed out, the boss becoming deader than dead. Chapter 2761, Level Skyrockets, It's Dead? That was close. For a moment there, I thought we would all get flattened. I am never going to go near superior mythics ever again before reaching Tier 4. These aren't things Tier 3 players like ourselves can do anything against. After everyone saw Tedelia bisected, they slumped down to the ground and breathed out a sigh of relief, rendered speechless by this narrow escape from death. However, many people also felt fortunate about their survival and couldn't help laughing happily. As for Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart, both were too tired to pay attention to Tedelia. They only wanted to sit down, rest, and relax their minds. However, before anyone could catch their breath, divine sounds descended from the sky and echoed throughout the valley, so melodious that everyone felt intoxicated. As expected of a first kill in the ruined mountain range. Even without divine providence, the loot's quality can actually trigger a divine hymn. Shi Feng, who was lying on the ground, was a little surprised by this situation. He never thought that the first kill of a realm lord would yield such excellent loot. Initially, he had been thinking of using divine providence and personally dealing the finishing blow to Deity. However, the situation at the end did not permit him to do so. As a result, he could only rely on Ferbero to finish the realm lord. While the divine hymn resounded in the valley, bright rays of light enveloped all the survivors. Shi Feng, who was initially at 78% of level 125, leveled up twice and reached 4% of level 127. Everyone else leveled up at least 3 times, with some even leveling up 4 times. The abundance of the EXP awarded utterly dumbfounded everyone. A superior mythic boss actually awards so much EXP? If it were before, we wouldn't get this much EXP even after killing 30 superior mythics. With this, we save at least half a month of grinding. It's a pity that everyone else died. If not, they would have saved on plenty of grinding time as well. Everyone couldn't help sighing over the abundant EXP from Deity. On one hand, they felt grateful that they could save plenty of time. On the other hand, they felt guilty for those who died. Not only did the dead players not receive any EXP from the raid, but they would even lose 1 level after resurrection. And even if Illusory Words and the other healers of the team resurrected them, they would still lose nearly half a level's worth of EXP. Only Shi Feng remained unfazed by this situation. Setting aside that this raid happened after the first major update, just the fact that Deity was both a superior mythic monster and a realm lord already meant that the EXP granted upon its death would be incredibly lavish. The descent of a divine hymn would also increase the EXP awarded. Furthermore, Deity was a level 128 monster, whereas most of the players on the team hadn't even reached level 120 yet. The bonus EXP these players received would be significant. However, it would be almost impossible for them to level up so quickly again in the future. After all, each region of the ruined mountain range had only 1 realm lord, which took 5 natural days or more to respawn. Moreover, the realm lords for each region weren't fixed. Hence, although their team had secured information on Deity the Soul Singer, this information would be useless because the next realm lord that spawned in this region would probably be some other superior mythic monster. It was almost impossible for players to come across the same realm lord multiple times in forbidden lands such as the ruined mountain range. Every boss that spawned would be new. Hence, players couldn't prepare for specific bosses and could only rely on brute strength or tools to secure victory. New. Standing up slowly, Shi Feng looked at his teammates and commanded, "Start resurrecting the others. Thorn, you guys patrol the surroundings. Make sure no monsters come ambushing us." Although Ferbero's presence had scared the surrounding monsters into fleeing and the likelihood of an ambush was low, it never hurt to be careful. After all, whether it was a forbidden land for all life or a forbidden land for humans, a single mistake was all it took to team wipe. "Leave it to us." Lifeless Thorn nodded before leaving to patrol the surroundings together with Cleansing Whistle and the others. As for Yenya, Illusory Words, and the other surviving healers, they began resurrecting the team members killed by the Soul Devourers. Although these people had died because they had their concentration sucked dry, their souls did not get damaged. Hence, resurrection was still possible. Only, they would be in a weakened state for several hours after getting resurrected and wouldn't be able to participate in battle right away. While the others were busy with their respective tasks, Shi Feng slowly made his way to Delia's corpse and waited for the loot to appear. Regarding Delia's loot, none of the members of Unyielding Soul or Crimson Emperor gave it much thought. After all, Shi Feng was the organizer of this team. Before they went on this expedition, they had already agreed that all discoveries made and items obtained would belong to Shi Feng. This was the basis for the cooperation of their 3 guilds. Moreover, even without the agreement, both Unyielding Souls and Crimson Emperor's peak experts would be too ashamed to ask for any loot. From start to end, they had merely played a supporting role and barely did anything during the raid. In fact, if not for Shi Feng landing the finishing blow, they wouldn't be alive right now. They also wouldn't have leveled up 3 or 4 times and gained a 15-day leveling advantage over the outside world's peak experts. One could say that the EXP harvest alone already made their trip to the ruined mountain range worthwhile. Not to mention, they also got to learn about the ruined mountain range and find out just how dangerous the neutral map was. With this information, their 2 guilds would have a much easier time exploring the neutral map in the future. Let's hope the loot isn't too bad. I'd even settle for just 1 or 2 tier 4 skill books or a legacy guidance fragment, Sir Feng prayed inwardly when he saw the dark clouds in the sky gradually scattering. Compared to the outside world, the ruined mountain range was impoverished. Unlike what most people of the outside world imagined, the ruined mountain range wasn't a place where one could just kill a few random mobs and get rich quick. On the contrary, be it forbidden lands for humans or forbidden lands for all life, both were scarce in material resources. Instead, the reason players and NPCs deemed forbidden lands to be rich in resources was the legacy resources found there. In the current God's domain, the kingdoms and empires controlled Tier 3 legacy resources. In the case of Tier 4 legacies, though, even the kingdoms and empires barely had any, some had none at all. However, the various forbidden lands still contained a considerable number of legacies for Tier 4 and above. Hence, forbidden lands were far richer in legacies than the maps in the outside world. Meanwhile, after players reached Tier 4, there were 3 ways they could improve themselves. The first and simplest method was upgrading their weapons and equipment. Such items were readily available in the various kingdoms and empires. The second method was significantly more difficult, obtaining Tier 4 skill and spell books. After reaching Tier 4, aside from spending legacy skill points to obtain Tier 4 legacy skills, the only other way players could obtain Tier 4 skills was through skill books. However, the monsters in the various kingdoms, empires, and standard neutral maps almost never dropped Tier 4 skill books. Only the monsters in Forbidden Lands would drop these items. Moreover, only monsters at the Mythic rank or above dropped them, and the drop rate was incredibly low. Tier 4 skills and spells were crucial in deciding a Tier 4 player's strength. Oftentimes, the result of a duel between Tier 4 players could be predicted based on the number of Tier 4 skills and spells the 2 sides held. This was because Tier 4 skills were magnitudes stronger than Tier 3 skills, with some capable of instant killing players of the same tier. Therefore, after reaching Tier 4, acquiring Tier 4 skill books was key to increasing a player's strength. The improvement players could gain from a Tier 4 skill could rival fragmented legendary items. Moreover, unlike fragmented legendary items, learned skills and spells didn't have a chance of dropping upon death. The third method to improve one's strength was also the most difficult one, obtaining legacy guidances for Tier 4 or above. After players reached Tier 4, levels would no longer be as important as before. Even if players reached level 150 and fulfilled the minimum condition for promotion to Tier 5, they wouldn't necessarily reach Tier 5. Getting promoted to Tier 5 was far more difficult than reaching Tier 4. For the Tier 4 promotion, players only needed to find their Tier 4 legacy land and learn a Tier 4 legacy skill within the allotted time. However, there were no such challenges for the Tier 5 promotion. Players weren't required to complete a troublesome promotion quest, nor did they need to search for some random location. Instead, getting promoted to Tier 5 was a very straightforward process. Players just had to raise their concentration to the Tier 5 standard, then reconstruct their own mana bodies, which would allow their essence to achieve a qualitative improvement. This was how one became a saint. Upon reaching Tier 5, players would no longer be an ordinary human. Their life rating would reach an extraordinary level. This was why very few players and NPCs would ever manage to reach Tier 5 in God's domain. Those who did would be dragons and phoenixes among men. The first step to reaching Tier 5 was breaking through the limits of one's mana body at Tier 3. While this might seem like an insignificant step, it would provide players with great help when they tried to reconstruct their mana bodies at Tier 4. The most difficult step was going from 0 to 1. Meanwhile, Violet Cloud had already taken the first step on the path to Tier 5. Meanwhile, legacy guidances could aid players in understanding the operating principles of mana because they recorded the comprehensions of ancient powerhouses on mana and the methods to utilize mana. Some even contained methods and experiences for constructing mana bodies. This was also why Shifeng had chosen to receive the Crimson-Eyed Sword Saint's legacy guidance without hesitation. At Tier 3, despite receiving samples of mana bodies, players still faced incredible difficulty constructing their mana bodies. If players wished to get promoted to Tier 5, they would need to construct a mana body that was at least 10 times stronger. The difficulty of this feat was simply unimaginable. Hence, legacy guidances were incredibly important. Only by continuously learning about mana and mana bodies could players construct a mana body rivaling Tier 5 existences. Otherwise, they would remain at Tier 4 for the rest of their lives. However, obtaining legacy guidances was easier said than done. Legacy guidance fragments were no less rare than fragmented legendary items. Generally, only the bosses of Forbidden Lands at the Realm Lord status or higher would have a small chance of dropping this treasure. This was also one of the reasons very few independent players ever managed to reach Tier 5. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. After all, let alone soloing superior mythics of the same level, even soloing superior mythics of a lower level was impossible for Tier 4 experts. Normally, raiding such monsters required the cooperation of multiple Tier 4 players. Moreover, even if players killed a superior mythic, they wouldn't necessarily obtain a legacy guidance fragment. And even if a fragment did drop, how many people would get a share of it? In addition, the guilds would frantically contest for these bosses, which further increased the difficulty of reaching Tier 5 for independent players. Unless one possessed a sufficiently strong backer or heaven-defying talent, Tier 5 would forever be beyond one's reach. Meanwhile, as Shifeng was praying and looking to the sky with an exhausted expression, dozens of dazzling items descended around him. The appearance of these items immediately attracted the ambient mana from several hundred yards around. When Shifeng spotted a strange stone sculpture of a monster among these items, his eyes instantly lit up. He even rubbed his eyes, thinking that he had seen wrong. An ancient beast sculpture. Did this monster swallow an ancient god's treasury? Chapter 2762, Ancient Treasure. While the strange beast statue held Shifeng's attention, the other players patrolling and resting in the distance noticed the several dozen items falling from the sky. Their eyes immediately widened in shock. Crap! What's up with this loot? I've never seen so many epic items and legendary materials dropping at once. The boss is a level 128 superior mythic, so the epic items it dropped can definitely be used up to level 150. Despite making so many contributions to the guild, I only managed to get a pair of epic bracers that can be used up to level 130. With all those epic items, I could probably fully gear myself in epic items. Despite everyone being peak experts or better, they still grew envious when they saw Tedelia's loot. Rather, it was inevitable that they would be envious. Although epic weapons and equipment had become a lot more common in the current god's domain, the majority of them could be used only up to level 100. Those that could be used up to level 120 were few and far between. As for epic items that could be used up to level 150, even the various superpowers wouldn't have more than 30 pieces. This wasn't because the various superpowers were slacking on killing level 100 plus mythic monsters, but because mythic monsters only had a tiny chance of dropping epic weapons and equipment that could be used up to level 150. Now, however, Tedelia had dropped over 10 epic items. Needless to say, every one of these epic items would be good up to level 150. After all, Tedelia was a level 128 superior mythic. According to their past experiences, the epic items dropped by level 120 plus superior mythic bosses would almost certainly have their level limit set at 150. However, the epic weapons and equipment dropped were only the tip of the iceberg. What truly made everyone's eyes glow were the legendary materials in the loot. Legendary materials could be used to create customized epic weapons and equipment, which would definitely be top tier among epic items. However, like level 150 epic items, the drop rate for legendary materials was pitifully low. Even level 100 plus superior mythics would, at most, drop inferior legendary materials. More often than not, they would drop only epic materials. Nonetheless, Deity had dropped as many as 7 legendary materials. In other words, one could produce 7 customized epic weapons and equipment with a level limit of level 150. Not to mention, the 20+ inferior legendary materials Deity dropped could also be used to produce top-tier epic weapons and equipment. In other words, Deity alone had essentially dropped over 30 level 150 epic weapons and equipment, more than enough to fully arm 2 players in level 150 epic items. This was something impossible even for the various superpowers at this stage of the game. As expected of a forbidden land. Just the loot of a superior mythic boss here equals the loot of 3 or 4 superior mythic bosses in the outside world. The loot's quality is also significantly better. Unyielding Heart also couldn't help his astonishment at this scene. At the same time, he resolved that once he reached Tier 4, he would absolutely bring a team here to explore the ruined mountain range. However, unlike everyone else, Feng paid no attention to the weapons, equipment, and materials Deity dropped. Instead, he stepped forward, collected a 1-meter-tall beast statue, and stored it in his epic spatial bag without hesitation. In Feng's opinion, even the combined value of all the other items Deity dropped couldn't compare to the value of this beast statue. Sacred Beast Statue, Soul-Devouring Beast, Epic Rank, Unique Item, one of 12 stone sculptures of sacred beasts made by Skyrockets Barstan. It holds incredible power. One shouldn't underestimate the beast statue just because it was an epic item. For Tier 4 players and above, this beast statue was easily 1,000 times more valuable than legendary items. An ancient god in God's domain, Skyrockets Barstan was known as the god of elements by everyone. Legend had it that he could control all magic elements, and he was incredibly strong even among the ancient gods. In God's domain, any item belonging to a god would already be an amazing item, let alone an ancient god's possession. The 12 sacred beast statues were one of Skyrockets Barstan's earliest creations. To both gods and ancient gods, these statues were trash. However, to Tier 4 players, these statues were priceless treasures. On the surface, the 12 sacred beast statues were only intended as room decor. However, if one placed these statues in areas with incredibly dense mana, the statues would generate a special signal. This signal allowed players inside the room to perceive the operating principles of a particular magic element. Although the granted perception was vague, it was still much better than blindly trying to feel and deduce the operating principles of the magic elements. Moreover, the effect stacked. With more beast statues collected, not only would one get to perceive more magic elements, but the intensity of the granted perception would also increase. In the past, a super guild had discovered an ancient god's treasury. And after working together with several superpowers and incurring countless casualties, the super guild had successfully raided the treasury. They had discovered 3 of the 12 sacred beast statues inside the treasury, one of them a medium-sized statue at the fragmented legendary rank. Due to these 3 beast statues, the super guild that found the treasury had ended up one of the 12 great guilds within a short period. Now, Feng had merely killed a superior mythic-ranked realm lord, yet he had actually acquired a sacred beast statue. This was simply unbelievable. I really lucked out this time. Although not even one fragmented legendary item dropped, the boss actually dropped an intact legacy guidance crystal, besides one of the 12 sacred beast statues. If any of those superpowers in the past found out about this, they would most likely go crazy from envy. Feng inwardly grew ecstatic as he picked up a crimson memory crystal from the ground. Normally, the legacy guidances players could obtain in Forbidden Lands were only fragmented crystals. Due to the instability of the mana inside these fragments, they would disappear after one use. However, an intact legacy guidance crystal was a different story. As the mana inside an intact crystal was incredibly stable, players could use it several times. Moreover, each use cost only 100 magic crystals. However, as these legacy guidance crystals were quite ancient, even a complete one could be used only 9 times. Regardless, an intact legacy guidance crystal was as valuable as a legendary item because it recorded far more information than a fragmented crystal. A single use of an intact crystal was easily worth 10 uses of fragmented crystals. In the past, some superpowers were even willing to exchange a legendary item for an intact legacy guidance crystal. However, nobody had ever taken up the offer. This was especially true for guilds and adventurer teams. After all, the legacy guidance crystal could lead to the birth of a tier 5 player, which was way more valuable than a legendary item. In God's domain, unless tier 6 God-ranked experts made an appearance, tier 5 players would stand at the pinnacle of the game. The resources a tier 5 player could acquire with their strength far exceeded the value of a legendary item. Several minutes later, Shifeng finished storing all of the dropped items in his spatial bag. He then let everyone rest for an additional 10 minutes before leading them toward the Earthfall secret land. Shifeng had no choice but to position the still weakened members at the center of the team. He also had Ferbero open up the path for them, clearing out the level 125 plus Great Lords and Grand Lords that assaulted their team on the way. He had no intention of resting whatsoever. "Commander, aren't we in too much of a hurry?" Solitary 9 asked in a whisper as he looked at Shifeng, who still had a deathly pale complexion. The fight with Tedelia left everyone's concentration below the 10% threshold. They could fall unconscious at any time. Shifeng was no exception. Yet, after resting for just a short while, Shifeng had led them deeper into the ruined mountain range without hesitation. At this point, they had already been running for close to 2 hours, and everyone had constantly been fighting throughout this period. Moreover, the monsters they fought all had considerably high combat standards and high basic attributes. Although Ferbero took on most of the monsters for them, the occasional monster still slipped by. And if they weren't careful, they would be easily overwhelmed by these monsters. "I know, but we don't have much time left," Shifeng said while controlling Ferbero. Smiling bitterly, he continued, "At this point, I can no longer summon a second demon prince. If the duration of this one lapses before we reach our destination, we'll die a miserable death." Upon hearing Shifeng's words, Solitary 9 looked at the endless monsters around them and got goosebumps. At the same time, he subconsciously raised his shield and stood closer to Shifeng. If not for the demon prince, they would definitely be doomed. In fact, they wouldn't be able to cope with all these monsters, even with several tier 4 experts on the team. After all, fighting in the ruined mountain range cost a lot of stamina and concentration. It was impossible for players to fight endlessly. "Move faster. We're almost there." Shifeng urged everyone through the team chat after taking a look at his map. At Shifeng's words, everyone hurriedly closed the distance to Ferbero. The team then broke out in a mad dash while blocking the attacks coming from the surrounding monsters. After frantically advancing for another dozen minutes or so, the team finally discovered a huge cave in the valley, with an entrance several dozen meters high. The cave exerted a mental influence that rivaled Tedelia's, making everyone feel discomfortable. Guild leader Black Flame, "Is this the place you were talking about?" Illusory Words asked anxiously. When she looked at the nearby cave, she got a sense of depression and uncertainty. A hint of fear had even appeared in her heart. If she was already experiencing such feelings even before entering the cave, it wasn't hard to imagine how dangerous it would be inside. Looking at the God Slayer's map, Shifeng said with certainty, "It should be here." But that mental influence, Unyielding Heart had goosebumps as he looked at the cave. If another monster like Tedelia emerged from the cave, they really would be on their way to the underworld. The mental influence is indeed considerable, but we went to great lengths to get here. We can't possibly give up now, can we? Shifeng also understood Unyielding Heart's worries. If they died now, it would indeed be a big loss. However, he had to obtain the God Slayer's treasure no matter what. In the worst-case scenario, he was even willing to use his final trump card. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU, okay, let's go in and take a look. Unyielding Heart nodded. He, too, thought that Shifeng's words were correct. They had already gotten this far. It would be a pity if they abandoned the expedition. Not to mention, they still had the Demon Prince to guard them. If further progress was truly impossible, they could still escape. Following which, Shifeng and the others made their way to the cave. However, when the team walked through the cave entrance, a startling scene suddenly occurred. The instant Fabero stepped into the cave, a red beam shot out from the cave's depths. Before Shifeng could even have Fabero execute evasive maneuvers, the red beam had already pierced through the demon prince's body. After getting struck, the Lord of the Dead, who had been invincible up to this point, burst into a bundle of flames and vanished without a trace. Chapter 2763, God? He died. Shifeng was dumbfounded at the sight of Fabero one-shot. Not only was that red beam unbelievably fast, but it even packed enough power to kill a demon prince instantly. Although the Bible of Darkness summoned only a weak clone of Fabero's true body, this clone still possessed the physique of a bona fide half-step demon king. Even true Tier 5 demon kings couldn't slay a half-step demon king in one hit. As for the red beam originating from a barrier trap or magic circle, the likelihood of that was low. Any barrier trap or magic array would require its user to be present to display its greatest power. Without the user, barrier traps and magic arrays could, at most, trap someone. They definitely did not have the ability to kill the clone of a half-step demon king instantly. Not to mention, the beam just now didn't look like it originated from a magic array or barrier but more like an offensive spell. Everyone else present was also stunned by this situation, and chills spread all over their body instantly. What happened? That's a half-step demon king we are talking about. The demon prince that they believed was invincible had actually gotten killed instantly. If they took a similar attack on their Tier 3 bodies, they, too, wouldn't last a second. However, this still wasn't the crucial point. The fact that the other party could one-shot a half-step demon king meant that the other party was among the most horrifying existences they had come across. Meanwhile, none of these horrifying existences were things players dared to offend because the possible consequences in doing so included the annihilation of their souls. If that happened, they would really have to start all over again. However, before anyone could snap out of their daze, a terrifying mental pressure assaulted them. As if time had stopped, everyone froze in place. In fact, even their thoughts had fallen into a torpor. They simply stood still, not knowing what to do. While everyone stagnated, Shifeng clearly sensed something, and his heart immediately grew cold at this discovery. It's over. In his previous life, he had seen this time-stopping phenomenon only once in a video of a group of Tier 6 God-ranked experts clashing against an ancient evil god. The fight back then had been earth-shattering. However, aside from the Tier 6 God-ranked experts and a few Tier 5 experts, the other players present had no idea what exactly had happened. By the time everyone recovered, the battle was already over. For most of the players present, the battle had basically started and ended in an instant. To them, it felt as if nothing had happened whatsoever. However, that had been far from being the case. By the time everyone recovered from their stupor, 1/10 of a kingdom had disappeared from God's domain, leaving behind an endless wasteland littered with shattered space. Now that this scene was replaying before Shifeng's eyes, this meant that the other party was no weaker than that ancient evil god in the past. Just when the flow of time was slowing and Shifeng's thoughts were about to stagnate, a crimson glow suddenly bloomed from his spatial bag. The appearance of the crimson glow immediately dispelled the power enveloping him. Afterward, a shabby yet dazzling broken blade flew out of the spatial bag and hovered quietly in front of him. This is the Ash Blade. Shifeng was shocked when he saw this broken blade. Various legends were circulating in God's domain regarding the Ash Blade, which was rumored to be the God Slayer's weapon. A weapon named the Ash Blade had also appeared in Shifeng's previous life. Back then, the owner of this weapon had been a mysterious expert nobody knew. However, what everyone did know was this mysterious person's heaven-defying feat with the Ash Blade in hand. This mysterious expert had single-handedly annihilated a super guild's main city. Moreover, the Ash Blade this person wielded was incredibly powerful. Even epic weapons would break after suffering 3 or 4 hits from the Ash Blade. Only fragmented legendary weapons could barely withstand its power. For this reason, everyone had suspected that the ash blade was a legendary weapon. Hence, Shifeng had kept the ash blade all this time instead of discarding it. After all, there might be a day when he could recast it. Of course, there was another legend regarding the ash blade, which stated that the ash blade was a clue to the god Slayer's legacy. However, according to historical materials in the libraries of the various kingdoms and empires, nobody had ever found the ash blade. Only after that mysterious expert had appeared and thoroughly shattered the status quo of God's domain did everyone start paying attention to the ash blade. How interesting. Out of the people that arrived this time, someone actually brought that item. It seems you are quite lucky. While Shifeng was surprised by the ash blade, a deep and indifferent voice came from the depths of the cave. It used not the human language but divine language instead. Similar to the demonic language, despite Shifeng having no knowledge of the divine language, his brain still understood the meaning conveyed by the words. Before Shifeng could react to the divine words, an elderly man clad in a grey robe appeared before him. This elderly man's body was in a translucent soul state. Moreover, it was incredibly unstable, as if it would disappear at any moment. However, Shifeng could still feel great power coming from the old man, which awoke in Shifeng the urge to submit. The old man's information was thoroughly hidden, it was impossible to glean any information about him at all. Esteemed elder, we came here purely by mistake. We did not come here with any purpose. I hope you can forgive us, Shifeng said apologetically to the old man. He dared not display any disrespect to the elder before him. Although Shifeng wasn't aware of the old man's true identity, the fact that the old man could stop time meant that he was undoubtedly at the Tier 6 standard. Even if the old man was only a remnant soul now, he still wasn't an existence Shifeng could afford to offend. You don't have to lie. I know why you came here, the old man said as he looked at Shifeng quietly, his deep gaze seemingly seeing through Shifeng's soul. Not only did you acquire that map, but you even hold the ash blade. In that case, you qualify to enter this place and know its secret. How much you can gain from this secret will depend entirely on yourself. I am only an observer and the protector of this place. I won't do anything to interfere with your progress. Shifeng felt deeply relieved when he heard the old man's words. As for whether the old man was lying to him or not, Shifeng didn't care. After all, even if the old man was lying to him, Shifeng couldn't do anything about it. Esteemed elder, may I know what will happen to my friends? Shifeng asked worriedly. Although he himself was no longer in any immediate danger, he couldn't say the same for his teammates. It was entirely possible for the old man to erase their existences permanently to keep this place a secret. Don't worry. I won't kill them, the old man said, chuckling as he glanced at Shifeng's teammates. After all, they are individuals blessed by heaven. They won't die even if they are killed, right? Shifeng couldn't help growing slightly nervous at the old man's question. For some reason, he had a feeling that this old man knew a lot of things. In fact, he might even understand the true existence of players. Otherwise, he wouldn't have asked such a question. This was the first time Shifeng had met such an NPC. Alright, I'll stop messing with you. Since Shifeng didn't dare respond to his question, the old man dropped the topic. He then said, you hold the ash blade, which means you are the chosen one. Hence, you may enter the cave. As for the others, they will be teleported out of this place. Of course, as you have been lucky enough to get selected, you can also bring 9 people with you. However, you'd best think about who to bring with you. The secret of this place isn't something heaven-blessed individuals like yourselves can imagine. A single mistake might even result in a true death for you. When the old man said the words, true death, he even placed emphasis on them. It sounded as if he was warning Shifeng, yet it also sounded as if he was teasing him. His behavior made it impossible for Shifeng to guess his thoughts. Nonetheless, Shifeng did not pay too much heed to the old man's warning. His goal in visiting the ruined mountain range was the Earthfall's secret land. Although he did not know what kind of secret the secret land contained, from what he heard, the 3 super guilds that monopolized the secret land had acquired a lot of benefits. This meant that the secret land shouldn't be a very dangerous place. I've decided to bring the 4 of them. May I know if that is okay? Shifeng asked as he pointed at Lifeless Thorn, Solitary 9, Yenya, and Cleansing Whistle. Only 4. After taking a glance at Lifeless Thorn and the others, the old man looked at Shifeng in surprise and asked, "Are you sure you don't want to bring more? You should know that the cost of entering that place is extraordinary. The amount of time you can stay there is also very limited." "I'm sure." Shifeng nodded. Initially, he had considered bringing more people with him. However, with the possibility of this secret being much greater than he imagined, every additional person he brought along would be an additional risk. Hence, he decided to bring only Lifeless Thorn's group of 4. After all, the 4 of them had long since known many of his secrets. They could truly be considered his people already. However, the Azura Adventurer team's other members were not as reliable. "Alright, this is your decision." The old man no longer pursued the matter and waved his hand at the 4 selected people. Apart from Lifeless Thorn, Solitary 9, Yenya, and Cleansing Whistle, all the others immediately transformed into streaks of light and flew out of the cave. The streaks of light then left the ruined mountain range, dodging the purple lightning decorating the neutral map's sky. Meanwhile, Lifeless Thorn and the others suddenly jumped up in surprise. "What's going on?" When Lifeless Thorn and the others saw their current situation, they fell into a daze. Just a moment ago, there had been nobody standing before them. In fact, even Shifeng had been behind them. However, in the blink of an eye, not only did Shifeng appear in front of them, but the rest of their team also disappeared without a trace. It was obvious that there was a blank in their memories. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EUE was now. A scary old man stood before them. And they couldn't read any information about this old man. "Alright, stop looking around randomly. Your gazes are very annoying. Do you really think I can't sense them?" The old man suddenly shouted at Lifeless Thorn and the others, the brief pressure he exuded nearly making their knees buckle. "I'll let you off this time, but if you behave like this to anyone else, they won't be as easy on you as I am." Upon hearing the old man's words, Lifeless Thorn and the others hurriedly nodded and promptly stopped using their identification skills on the old man and their surroundings. "That's more like it. Now, follow me." The old man nodded when he saw Lifeless Thorn and the others turn obedient. He then began walking into the depths of the cave. Chapter 2764, Land of Fallen Gods. Outside of the ruined mountain range, devouring swamp, dozens of streaks of lights descended onto a swampy woodland as Unyielding Heart and the others were transported out of the ruined mountain range. "Were we resurrected?" Unyielding Heart looked at his surroundings with some confusion. "Why did we get resurrected here? Where's Brother Black Flame?" The devouring swamp was a neutral map adjacent to the ruined mountain range. However, the map was very high level, with monsters at level 130 or above. It wasn't suitable for them to travel across. Hence, they had previously traveled through a level 120 neutral map to enter the ruined mountain range. "I don't think we got resurrected," Illusory Words said, shaking her head. "We were most likely teleported here, probably the doing of that horrifying existence we came across just now." Although she didn't know what had happened, the most likely possibility was that they were banished from the cave since none of them had lost any levels. Big Sis Illusory, aside from Black Flame, Azura's side seems to be missing 4 people too, Blue Gown said strangely after carefully inspecting the team. At Blue Gown's words, everyone else noticed that Lifeless Thorn and 3 others of the Azura Adventurer team were indeed missing. At this discovery, Azura's members couldn't help becoming anxious. Did they get left behind? Unyielding Heart subconsciously muttered a guess. At Unyielding Heart's words, everyone present felt chills crawling down their backs. Before they lost consciousness, they had clearly felt a frightening mental influence from the depths of the cave. If not for them losing consciousness a moment later, they might have dropped to their knees the next second. Without a doubt, the source of the mental influence was the most terrifying existence they had come across since entering God's domain. They found it truly hard to imagine the consequences of being targeted by such an existence. If that's true, this is bad. Illusory words also frowned at this possibility. Against that kind of frightening existence, even a Tier 4 player like Shifeng would be no different from an ant. In fact, the said existence might even be able to obliterate their souls. After all, a few of the many frightening existences she knew of possessed this kind of horrifying ability. Not to mention, the existence they just met was many times stronger than any of those frightening existences. Let's reorganize the team and go back to take a look. Simply standing around and doing nothing isn't a solution, Unyielding Heart suggested. No, we cannot go back in, Illusory Words countered, shaking her head. Since that existence chose to keep them there should be a reason for this. Otherwise, why could we safely leave that place, whereas they couldn't? Moreover, we don't have the time to enter the ruined mountain range again. How so? Unyielding Heart asked strangely. Although Illusory Words' deduction might be correct, they couldn't just abandon Shifeng and the others without doing anything. After all, they didn't even know whether they had accomplished their task. If the task wasn't completed, their 3 guilds would be in big trouble afterward. I just received news that not only did the number of NPCs increase again, but the various powers members are also facing greater difficulties in leveling up. Shortly after we started sending our members into the Secret Covenant Tower, the superpowers began having designs over it. They think that the tower is an excellent leveling spot, and they've already clashed with us outside Sky Spring City several times, Illusory Words explained. We need to head back as soon as possible to preside over the situation. Otherwise, it'll be impossible to seal off Sky Spring City with just a bunch of Tier 3 experts. They're taking action already? Unyielding Heart was surprised by this revelation. Initially, he thought that the various superpowers wouldn't pay as much attention to the Secret Covenant Tower just for the sake of leveling. Hence, he hadn't anticipated such a development. However, the massive increase in the NPC population had undoubtedly increased the various powers' urgency and difficulty in leveling up. This made excellent leveling spots even more valuable than before. Now, just for the sake of leveling up quickly, many superpowers had already started targeting the Secret Covenant Tower. If these superpowers entered the tower and discovered the Tier 3 legacies inside, the situation would definitely become even more troublesome. So, we need to return quickly to ensure nobody sneaks into Sky Spring City and the Secret Covenant Tower. Otherwise, the various superpowers would have already occupied the tower before Black Flame completes his task. If that happens, we'll end up even more passive, Illusory Words said. She then took out a transfer scroll and immediately teleported to Crimson Emperor's residence in Silverwing City. After Illusory Words teleported away, the other Crimson Emperor members took out transfer scrolls and teleported to Silverwing City one after another. What should we do? Mu Lingsha asked Unyielding Heart as Crimson Emperor's members left. Do we return too? That's the only thing we can do. Let's just hope Brother Black Flame's side is safe. Otherwise, we'll have a difficult road to walk down the line, Unyielding Heart said, sighing as he took out a transfer scroll himself. Unyielding Soul's other members immediately followed suit one after another. As for Azura's members, they planned to remain in the Devouring Swamp and level up while waiting for their vice-commanders to contact them before taking further action. During the time Illusory Words and Unyielding Heart had returned to Silverwing City to control the overall situation, Shifeng and the others in the distant ruined mountain range had arrived at the deepest part of the cave. Is this the secret of this cave? Shock and surprise filled Lifeless Thorn as he stared at the icy cavern before him. The icy cavern was over a dozen kilometers wide. Its interior was a snowy white world, with ice sculptures in the shape of humans, elves, half-orcs, giants, dwarves, and other races erected all over. Every one of these ice sculptures radiated an aura that was stronger than the demon Prince Ferberos. Meanwhile, these statues numbered in the tens of thousands. Moreover, the dozen or so ice sculptures at the cavern's center radiated an aura that was much stronger than that of the other ice sculptures. Despite standing so far away, Lifeless Thorn still felt awe and fear in his heart when he looked at these statues. He dared not approach any of them. At this moment, let alone Lifeless Thorn, even Shifeng was astounded by this scene. Shifeng had a much clearer idea than Lifeless Thorn did of what kind of existence those central ice sculptures were. Indeed. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Those dozen or so ice sculptures were bona fide Tier 6 gods. He had even read about a few of them in libraries. From the scene in the cavern, he could tell that these gods and people of various races had been going up against something. Only, the end result was that every one of them got frozen into eternal ice sculptures. What the hell happened here? Shifeng was greatly puzzled as he looked at this horrific scene. Tier 6 gods were existences that stood at the apex of God's domain. A force of over a dozen gods could devastate the continent. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that such a force could even sweep through the dark abyss. In fact, even if all of the Tier 6 god-ranked experts that existed in his previous life joined hands, they could just barely manage to contend with a force of a dozen or so Tier 6 gods. Yet, these Tier 6 gods had actually been killed, annihilated in a single move, by the looks of. Chapter 2765, God Slayer's Legacy. After a brief silence inside the cave, a deep, emotional voice entered Shifeng's ears. You had best not ask or think about what happened in the past and what caused the deaths of so many of the world's powerful people and even gods. You also must not look into these matters. The consequences of doing so are not something even heaven-blessed individuals like yourselves can bear. You might even lose your minds as a result, the old man warned when he saw the curiosity on the faces of Shifeng and the others. Although the old man's voice did not carry any mental influence or coercion, the certainty in his tone made Shifeng shudder involuntarily. As for Lifeless Thorn, Solitary 9, Yenya, and Cleansing Whistle, although they reacted fearfully to the old man's warning, the curiosity on their faces was clear for all to see. It was evident that they did not take the old man's words seriously. After all, this was a matter related to gods. Players who were new to God's domain treated the word God as merely a noun. At best, gods were a type of powerful monster to them. However, those who truly ventured around God's domain and studied the historical materials in the libraries of the various kingdoms and empires would realize that gods weren't just powerful existences. Simultaneously, they represented a kind of extreme, a road leading to the top of God's domain. Hence, anything related to gods represented a massive opportunity for players. This was especially true for Tier 3 players like themselves. They were quite aware that they could no longer advance on their own. If they wished to get to the next level, they would have to follow in the footsteps of their predecessors. Meanwhile, the footsteps of gods were undoubtedly the best to follow. None of you should look deeper into this matter, at least not now, Shifeng suddenly said to Lifeless Thorn and the others. He knew very well how attractive gods were to Tier 3 experts. They wouldn't hesitate to look into matters related to gods, even if the risks were big. After all, the road to promotion was simply too difficult. Normally, players could already improve significantly with the ruins left behind by Tier 5 existences, let alone those of Tier 6 gods. However, the disappearance of some peak experts and apex experts from both the game world and the real world most likely had something to do with Tier 6 gods. Anyone who tried to get involved with Tier 6 gods as Tier 3 and Tier 4 players would die before achieving anything. If they were lucky, they would have their accounts destroyed and need to start all over again. If they were unlucky, they might disappear like those experts in the past. Upon hearing Shifeng's words, Lifeless Thorn and the others eyed him curiously. They never thought that Shifeng would actively stop them from looking into this matter. It seems you know your limits, kid, the old man said, gazing at Shifeng with warm approval. That's right. Only people who know the limits of their strength and abilities can live long lives. Even you heaven-blessed individuals are no exception. At the old man's words, Lifeless Thorn and the others promptly awakened from their greed. Thanks, Commander. I never thought I would get seduced by the benefits in front of me, Lifeless Thorn said in gratitude, a hint of fear in his voice. God's domain had always emphasized balance. All gains came with losses. If one tried to secure an opportunity despite lacking the necessary strength, they would only wind up dead. Currently, they hadn't even reached Tier 4, yet they were actually thinking of looking into the secrets of Tier 6. That was simply suicide. That is normal. After all, not many people in God's domain can remain calm when faced with matters related to gods, Shifeng said, shaking his head. If not for him having a wealth of experience adventuring in God's domain, he wouldn't have fared any better than Lifeless Thorn. In fact, he might have reacted even more crazily. In the current era where the gods had withdrawn from the world, even the various superpowers would go nuts over a clue related to Tier 6 gods. In fact, even Tier 5 NPCs would fight desperately to secure this clue. Alright, that's enough talking. After seeing that Shifeng and the others had calmed down, the old man beckoned to them and said, "Come here. Next up is the moment you have all been waiting for. It is also the final wealth and treasure that person left behind for you heaven-blessed individuals." A treasure left behind by the God Slayer? Shifeng grew a little excited at the old man's words. The God Slayer was a mythical figure in God's domain. Although it wasn't certain whether the God Slayer had become a god or not, it was certain that he was born a human. Meanwhile, the God Slayer was an existence that even gods feared. In fact, the number of gods the God Slayer had slain exceeded 10. However, for reasons unknown, the God Slayer had suddenly vanished into God's domain's history, leaving behind only a few clues pertaining to his existence. Normally, these clues were acquired from ancient ruins. It was almost impossible to find any records of the God Slayer in the various kingdoms and empires' libraries, as if the God Slayer's existence had been wiped out by history. Future generations couldn't look into the God Slayer's existence, even if they wanted to. However, there were a lot of negative comments about the God Slayer. Some people said that the God Slayer was a great sinner of God's domain, and others said that the God Slayer was the culprit behind the twilight of the gods. Shortly afterward, the old man led Shifeng's group of 5 to the cavern center, where the dozen or so frozen gods stood. Upon arriving there, Shifeng and the others noticed a space-time crack there, as small as a fingernail, undetectable from a distance. Only after moving within 30 yards of the crack did they barely notice it. Directly underneath this space-time crack was an incomparably complicated magic array. It was so complicated that even Shifeng, who was an advanced magician, felt dizzy after just one glance at it. Needless to say, he couldn't even begin to decipher it. This is the treasure. Solitary 9 was stunned when he saw this tiny space-time crack. For a moment, he even felt that the old man had duped them. What possible use could they have for a fingernail-sized space-time crack? Even if this space-time crack led to somewhere, with how small it was, players couldn't enter it. That's right. This is the treasure, the old man said, chuckling. You might think that such a small space-time crack is no big deal, but what if I say that it connects to the past? Connects to the past? Solitary 9 was again stunned. Crossing timelines was simply impossible. It should still be impossible even in a virtual reality game like God's Domain. Esteemed Elder, are you perhaps saying that this space-time crack can allow us to travel to another world? Lifeless Thorn asked, thinking that the old man did not understand what the words, connects to the past, meant. In fact, even Shifeng suspected that what the old man truly meant was that the space-time crack allowed people to travel to a different space. After all, there were plenty of foreign spaces and other worlds in God's domain. No, it is really linked to the past. It isn't linked to an other world or a different space, the old man insisted, shaking his head. He could tell what Shifeng and the others were thinking, and he said in a determined tone, I know you don't believe me. There is no way you can believe me either. After all, time travel is something even ancient gods are incapable of accomplishing. However, it is true. Moreover, this space-time crack is connected to the ancient era of God's domain. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The old man's words dumbfounded everyone present. Connected to the ancient era of God's domain? Shifeng felt his worldview crumbling, shocked beyond words. Could this be the Earthfall Secret Land's true secret? The ancient era of God's domain was an era of wonders. Various supercivilizations were intertwined during this era when gods still roamed the world. And because the twilight of the gods had yet to occur, the world of God's domain was incredibly rich in resources. The present era of God's domain couldn't hold a candle to the ancient era in this regard. I won't say anything more. Since this is your first time, you can enter it without any cost. However, you can only spend a limited amount of time inside. Moreover, the stronger you become and the greater your impact during the ancient era, the easier it will be for the world to notice your presence. If that happens, the world will reject your existence and expel you. What you can obtain during the ancient era will all depend on your own abilities, the old man said slowly. However, I have to warn you that the ancient era is not the paradise you imagine it to be. You will die a permanent death if you aren't careful. Before Shi Feng and his companions could ask any questions, the old man waved his hand. Immediately, Shi Feng and the other four transformed into streaks of light that plunged into the space-time crack, disappearing from the cavern. Chapter 2766, Ancient Era. In a valley amid some lofty mountains, a team of nearly 5,000 people frantically fought a group of demons. The battlefield was crazed and spectacular and looked just like a battlefield in ancient times. Both sides suffered severe casualties, their blood staining the valley red. The smell of blood carried for tens of thousands of yards. Even those inured to battle would find this situation uncomfortable and unbearable. However, neither side showed any intention of stopping, both prepared to fight to the bitter end. Of the two armies battering each other, the demon army was led by a level 135, tier 4 great demon, while a woman led the human army. The woman in question possessed golden hair and crimson eyes. She wielded a silver sacred sword and was clad in a knight's blue sacred armor. As the woman contended against several dozen level 130+, tier 3 demons, her HP continuously decreased. However, despite being at a complete disadvantage, the more she fought, the brighter the glow her sacred sword radiated. The power she exhibited also kept increasing. Damn it! You're actually using the aria of holy blood? Don't even think I will let you finish it. The tier 4 great demon's expression turned solemn when he saw the glowing sacred sword. Immediately, he spread out his 4 wings and flew toward the crimson-eyed woman. Everyone, protect the commander. Do not let that great demon approach the commander, a tall man shouted before rushing at the great demon with his golden shield raised. Subsequently, several dozen other melee classes nearby also charged at the great demon, all of them ignoring the fact that they were merely at tier 2. Scram! Seeing the crowd charging at him, the demon commander pulled out his crimson greatsword and slashed the space in front. Over 100 crimson beams shot forth, tearing apart space as they advanced. The power they carried simply wasn't something even tier 3 existences could dream of withstanding. Boom! The next moment, the several dozen tier 2 melee classes were instantly vaporized, while the shield-bearing man was sent smashing into the mountain. Damn it! I'll kill you. When a man standing nearby saw this scene, his eyes turned bloodshot, and he promptly charged at the great demon with his sword raised. However, before this man could even get near the great demon, the long-range spells of several tier 3 demons had already killed him. In the meantime, blood had already dyed the body of the crimson-eyed woman fighting several dozen tier 3 demons. Her complexion was also deathly pale. However, despite the state of her body, her gaze remained indescribably firm. Be punished, demons, the crimson-eyed female knight bellowed as she raised her sacred sword. The sacred sword released a beam of light that shot to the skies. Countless streaks of light then rained down on the valley like shooting stars, and the demons struck by these shooting stars immediately fell into a heavily injured state. The situation on the battlefield reversed in the blink of an eye. Kill! We cannot let these demons take even a step into human territory, the crimson-eyed knight shouted, her pale complexion showing no signs of fatigue. She then raised her sacred sword and charged at the demons who were still fighting. The female knight's words stimulated the surviving humans. They began madly fighting against the demons. However, after a few exchanges, the humans present were dumbfounded, staring at a distant pile of demon corpses in disbelief. The next moment, the great demon commander, who was over a dozen meters tall, emerged from this pile of corpses, a hint of mockery and contempt on his face. The aria of holy blood is indeed powerful. And for you to still be alive after using this desperate move, your mental willpower is truly astonishing. I'm certain you can rank among the top tier 4 powerhouses, the great demon said as he looked at the crimson-eyed knight. He then asked mockingly, but can you use it a second time? At this great demon's words, the complexions of the surviving humans instantly turned ashen. This was the aria of holy blood they were talking about. This was the sacred sword Blood Moon's unique spell. Most people would be able to use it only once before departing for the netherworld. This was because the consequent pain of the body and mind was not something ordinary people could bear. However, in return for the steep price, once the aria of holy blood was cast, it exerted astonishing power. Even a great demon would sustain heavy injuries and lose half of their HP after getting struck by this move. Moreover, without restoration items such as the Water of Life, it would be impossible to recover from the attack. Yet, now, needless to say, it would be impossible for the female knight to use aria of the holy blood again. However, with the humans' current combat power, they were no match for the great demon. After all, the great demon before them was a bona fide demon marquis. The purity of his bloodline was far superior to that of ordinary great demons. Since you no longer have any other moves to make, it's my turn now. When the great demon saw the silent humans before him, an indescribably excited and joyful expression appeared on his face. Don't even think about it. The female knight suddenly appeared above the great demon's head and brandished her sacred sword. 3 phantom swords appeared in the sky, the sight stunning everyone present. This is the sword Saint Lord Lox's personal technique, Sky Cleaver. The commander actually mastered it. When the surviving humans saw the 3 phantom swords in the sky, a look of awe and admiration appeared on their faces. You're already on your last breath, yet you're still putting up such boring resistance. When the great demon saw the 3 phantom swords, he did not reveal any awe or fear whatsoever. On the contrary, he nonchalantly brandished his great sword. Boom! The great sword and 3 phantom swords collided, the resulting shockwave sent both humans and demons stumbling backward. Large cracks formed on the ground the great demon stood on, and the great sword the great demon wielded let out a low hum. The great demon's arms were also trembling. Upon seeing this scene, the humans felt both encouraged and excited. Sure enough, a sword saint's personal technique was truly extraordinary. However, a moment later, everyone's joy turned into despair because the crimson-eyed knight hadn't fared too well either. Not only was her complexion paler, but even her pupils had begun to fade. It was evident that she was on her last breath, she could no longer fight. Ha ha ha! Amazing! Amazing! This is the first time I, Neiman Carlo, have seen a powerful tier 4 human like you. The great demon burst out laughing as he looked at the female knight. However, it all ends here. Before you die, I will drag you all down to hell first. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. After saying so, Neiman Carlo began chanting the incantation for the tier 4 spell Hell's Gate. Suddenly, the sky darkened. A huge door decorated with skulls appeared, the blood-red glow from the skull's eye sockets and the agonizing screams coming from the door seemingly telling everyone that their destiny was about to end. Even if the humans present wished to interrupt Neiman Carlo's spell, they couldn't do so, as the surviving demons were doing their best to stop them. However, just as the formation of the Hell's Gate was about to culminate, a spatial tear over 1,000 yards long suddenly split the sky. The resulting spatial storm not only disrupted the mana in the sky but even shattered the magic array summoning the Hell's Gate. Afterward, several figures fell out of the spatial tear and crashed onto the battlefield in the valley, their landing sending clouds of dust into the air. So, this is the ancient era? The man standing in the lead of the group muttered in amazement as he glanced at the world around him. Chapter 2767, You chose the wrong opponent. At the sudden appearance of Shifeng's group of 5, the whole battlefield immediately went silent. The humans and demons all stared at Shifeng's group with looks of surprise, confusion, or anger. Who are they? They came out of that large spatial tear, so they shouldn't be ordinary existences. Maybe they're guardians from the holy city. However, their auras seem weak. Those people are also only at tier 3. They shouldn't be the holy city's guardians. Moreover, judging by their looks, they seem to be heaven-blessed individuals. The humans began a hushed discussion among themselves as they scrutinized Shifeng's group. Initially, they had held hope that Shifeng's group could save them. However, after noticing the 5 players' auras, they immediately fell into despair. The crimson-eyed knight peered at Shifeng's group with her blurry sight. It was evident that she, too, felt surprised and puzzled by the sudden appearance of Shifeng's group. Humanity's heaven-blessed individuals. When the great demon Niemann Carlos saw Shifeng's group, he, too, was shocked. How is this possible? Niemann Carlo wasn't particularly surprised to see more heaven-blessed individuals of the human race appearing in this place. What shocked him was the spatial crack that these humans had arrived through. That massive spatial crack had carried an extraordinary amount of power, even he would lose his life if he accidentally came into contact with it. Yet, Shifeng's group had actually come out of it directly. Compared to the humans and demons originally fighting on this battlefield, however, the ones most surprised by the present situation were Shifeng's 5. How is this possible? Shifeng's heart surged with shock as he looked at a group of people standing among the human army. Why are there other players here? Aside from the many NPCs, the human army also had quite a number of players. Moreover, the average level of these players was incredibly high. Even the lowest leveled among them was level 128, while some had even surpassed level 130. Shifeng was certain that he had arrived in the ancient era of God's domain. After all, the environment here simply couldn't be found anywhere in the modern God's domain. The mana in this land was so abundant that it was close to condensing into a liquid state. He could even clearly feel the magic elements in the air. Like sprites, some of the magic elements were cheerful and lively, some were cold and lonely, some were hot and angry, etc. He could sense all of this with exceptional clarity. Moreover, the NPCs on this battlefield wore significantly different gear compared to the NPCs of modern times. Their weapons and equipment were of much higher quality. In the modern God's domain, NPCs were mainly geared with epic weapons and equipment, very few possessed fragmented legendary items. After all, fragmented legendary items were incredibly rare and precious even to NPCs. However, that was far from the case for the NPCs here. Every NPC had at least 1 or 2 fragmented legendary items. The female knight leading the human army was even fully equipped in fragmented legendary items. The sword she wielded was also a top-tier fragmented legendary weapon. Moreover, what was even more incredible was that Shifeng had found someone he recognized. This person was none other than Yuluo, a captain of the Heaven's Blade adventurer team, based on Dragonheart Island. Only, unlike the Yuluo he had met on Dragonheart Island, the one he was looking at now was like a completely different person. Presently, not only had Yuluo reached level 129 already, but she even sported an epic staff and a full suit of epic equipment. Although her epic equipment wasn't a set, her equipment standard was still ridiculously excellent. Unlike the last time Shifeng met Yuluo, though, the cleric looked much more haggard. She did not possess the aura and spirit of a peak expert at all. Guild leader Black Flame. Meanwhile, at this time, Yuluo, who stood amid the human army, also noticed the 5 new arrivals on the battlefield. And when she saw that the man leading this group was none other than Zero Wings guild leader, Black Flame, her originally dispirited expression immediately became energetic. Do you know them, Yuluo? The female oracle standing beside Yuluo asked curiously upon seeing the latter's reaction. The female oracle was a level 131 player clad in a white dress, wearing a white priest's hat. Yes. Moreover, he's my fellow countryman, Yuluo said, nodding excitedly. Fellow countryman. The female oracle scrutinized Shifeng's group. She soon noticed that the average level of Shifeng's group was quite low, and their appearances indeed resembled Yuluo's a lot. Particularly, the feeling of incompatibility Shifeng's group had with the other players in God's domain was exactly the same as Yuluo. The female oracle then shook her head and said, "What a pity. His luck is truly poor. He actually got teleported to this place." Upon hearing the female oracle's words, Yuluo remembered the situation they were in, and her heart grew cold. The joy on her face promptly disappeared. The death penalty in the god's domain they were currently in was different from the god's domain on the other side. Players would not only lose 2 or more levels upon death but also fall into a mentally weakened state. Depending on the severity of the situation, players might even lose some of their memories. And worse, the use of resurrection spells could only mitigate the loss of EXP and not restore the lost memories. Moreover, even when resurrected using a resurrection spell, players wouldn't be resurrected on the spot but inside the life temple of a random main city run by humans. Of course, if players had registered themselves with a main city, they could get resurrected in the life temple of a fixed main city. However, Shifeng's group had just arrived in this world. They definitely hadn't registered themselves with a main city yet. If they died, they would get resurrected at a random main city. Meanwhile, a great distance separated the main cities run by humans and there were no teleportation arrays in these cities. In other words, so long as Shifeng's group died, Yuluo was unlikely to meet him again. After all, humans had many main cities, even in this world. Just the ones she knew already numbered over 500. As for the possibility of Shifeng's group coming out alive from this battlefield, that was simply impossible. In the original God's domain, a group of Tier 3 players could still put up a fight against a Tier 4 Great Demon. However, in this world, let alone putting up a fight, Tier 3 players would be considered capable if they could escape with their lives. The reason for this was the incredibly high average combat standard of the monsters here. Monsters of the caliber of great demons would possess combat standards rivaling peak experts. However, the combat system of monsters was completely different from the realms of refinement players relied on. In skill and spell utilization, monsters such as great demons could display combat standards at the spiritualization realm without having to exert themselves. Such monsters were not opponents Void Realm experts like herself could hope to match. However, before Yuluo could snap out of her daze, the great demon Neiman Carlo stopped paying attention to Shifeng's group and shifted his gaze back to the Crimson-Eyed Knight. The great demon then looked at the dozen or so Tier 3 demons around him and commanded, "Go get rid of them. Please leave it to us, milord." The heavily injured demons nodded and flapped their wings. They then flew toward Shifeng's group of 5, their speed greatly surpassing even Tier 3, agility-focused assassins. Not good. Those demon leaders are working together to target them. The level 131 female oracle was shocked by this development. She never thought that Neiman Carlo would have his trusted subordinates deal with Shifeng's group. Although these demon leaders had been heavily injured by the aria of holy blood, individually, they were still stronger than Tier 3 experts. In addition, if over a dozen of them worked together, they could form a demonic array that greatly increased their combat power. "Big Sis Cloud, let's go save them quickly," Yuluo urged anxiously when she saw the demon leaders targeting Shifeng's group. She knew that Shifeng was incredibly strong. After all, he was someone the various superpowers on Dragonheart Island had labeled a peerless expert. His strength surpassed even that of domain realm monsters. However, not only did the demons of this world possess high combat standards, but their demonic arrays also operated like the humans' battle arrays. Even a peerless expert would fall in the face of such a group of demons. "Die, humans!" Runes suddenly lit up all over the demon leaders' bodies. The auras they radiated also intensified significantly until they were just short of rivaling ordinary great demons in terms of strength. Simultaneously, the weapons in their hands turned into brilliant rays of light. Tier 3 combination skill, Skyflower's Shadow. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU immediately, countless red petals fell from the sky, heading toward Shifeng's group. Every flower petal tore space as they fluttered down, making it seem as if night was falling. "You used a good skill, I'll give you that. Unfortunately, you chose the wrong opponent. Shifeng snorted when he saw the red flower petals descending toward him. He then unsheathed the abyssal blade and unleashed his aura. Simultaneously, a mana domain spread out from his body, instantly covering a 1,000-yard radius and enveloping the entire battlefield. The next moment, Yu Luo saw Shifeng execute an upward slash with the abyssal blade. Bronze Combat Technique, Swords Transmigration. Chapter 2768, Repelling Demons, Sacred Sword Blood Moon. As Shifeng swung his long sword, innumerable dazzling stars suddenly formed around him. Now that he had reached Tier 4 and had the assistance of a mana domain, this sword's transmigration was more than twice as strong as when he executed it at Tier 3. Boom! The next moment, the dazzling stars shattered the descending flower petals and attacked the demon leaders. Before the demon leaders could react, they were already flying back over 100 yards away, their HPs decreasing in large chunks. They even had difficulty standing up. He's strong. He sent so many demon leaders flying with just one move. Could he really have been sent here from the Holy City? Tier 4. Crap. This aura definitely belongs to a Tier 4 class. He's a Tier 4 Sword Emperor. With that power, he's a powerhouse even among other Tier 4 classes. Everyone was momentarily stunned by this development. None of them thought that the seemingly ordinary Shifeng would send over a dozen demon leaders flying in one move. Moreover, he was even a bona fide Tier 4 Sword Emperor, an existence capable of rivaling Tier 4 great demons. Yu Luo, your fellow countryman is so strong. No wonder you were so excited to see him. I never thought he would be a Tier 4 Sword Emperor. With that kind of strength, he can definitely rank within the top 5, or maybe even top 3 in our city, the female oracle named Cooling Cloud exclaimed as she looked at Shifeng. She, too, had not expected Yu Luo's acquaintance to be so powerful. A Tier 4 player. This was a goal players like herself struggled toward desperately. Unfortunately, the Tier 4 promotion quest was simply too challenging. Her one attempt had failed. In the main city she resided in, there were only 3 known Tier 4 players. Every one of them was a big shot in the city. They were existences far beyond Tier 3 players like herself. However, at this moment, let alone Cooling Cloud, even Yu Luo, who was familiar with Shifeng, was wide-eyed in shock and incredulity. Tier 4. She had improved a lot after arriving in this world. However, Tier 4 remained a huge threshold to cross. Unless she could take one step further in her combat standard, she would be doomed to hover forever in the ranks of Tier 3. However, despite being at level 127, Shifeng had already become a Tier 4 Sword Emperor. Moreover, he had accomplished this feat even before entering this unbelievable world. Meanwhile, as the humans were goggling at Shifeng in shock, the great demon Niemann Carlo gazed at Shifeng with a solemn expression, as if he was looking at a monster. Who are you? Niemann Carlo asked, a hint of fear appearing in his eyes. A heaven-blessed individual can't possibly wield such power. After Shifeng unleashed his aura, let alone the demon leaders present, even a demon marquis like himself felt suppressed. In fact, even the mana flowing inside his body was significantly slower. Now, he could exhibit only 60% of his normal combat power, at most. Generally, suppressing a Tier 4 existence's strength by even 10% was already a difficult feat, what more 40%. Yet, Shifeng had done it. That's none of your business. Shifeng paid no heed to the great demon's question. Instead, he smiled and said, I will give you 2 options now. The first is for us to continue fighting and determine the victor through life and death. The second option is for you to get out of my sight, together with your people. As soon as Shifeng finished speaking, a deathly silence fell over the battlefield. Yu Luo and the other players, in particular, gaped, their wide-open mouths forming an "Oh, is he crazy?" Even if he's a Sword Emperor, Niemann Carlo won't spare him after being threatened in such a way. It's over. That Niemann Carlo will definitely go all out against us. Demons had always been arrogant in God's domain. They did not place other creatures in their eyes at all, even when dealing with the dragon race. Needless to say, the arrogance of a demon marquis was even greater. Even their commander, Angelica Teresa, would not dare utter such words to Neiman Carlo. After all, Neiman Carlo was truly powerful. His strength was outstanding even among Tier 4 demons. He had the potential to become a demon prince. Otherwise, he wouldn't have become the commander of a demon army. Sure enough, after the demon marquis heard Shifeng's words, Neiman Carlo's complexion turned indescribably ugly. Simultaneously, everyone felt the ambient mana grow violent. However, just when everyone thought a bloody battle was about to begin. "We're leaving," Neiman Carlo said, his mouth practically twisting. After giving Shifeng one last glare, he turned around with clenched fists and instantly disappeared, leaving behind only a group of demons exchanging stunned looks. What? He left? What's going on? Everyone in the human army was dumbfounded at Neiman Carlo's departure. After all, even with the assistance of a Tier 4 Sword Emperor like Shifeng, their army was still in dire straits. Yet, Neiman Carlo had actually left without saying another word. He behaved nothing like a demon at all. Angelica Teresa, the commander of the Night Legion present, couldn't help looking at Shifeng strangely. She never thought that Shifeng's words would carry such great deterrence for the demons. The great demons here are actually so smart. Cleansing Whistle was also surprised when she saw Neiman Carlo leaving. She knew that Shifeng possessed the Bible of Darkness, which could be used not only to summon demons but also to suppress hostile demons. This was why Shifeng could push back those demon leaders so easily. However, of those present, only Shifeng knew what exactly had happened. The Bible of Darkness held absolute control over demons. Although Neiman Carlo did not know Shifeng held the Bible of Darkness, the great demons still possessed an instinctive fear and dread of it. Moreover, Shifeng had repelled over a dozen demon leaders with a single move. This aggravated the fear in Neiman Carlo. Demons were very smart creatures. After the first major update took place, demons would almost never fight battles that they were not confident of winning. Even if Neiman Carlo were significantly stronger than Shifeng right now, the fear and dread he felt for the Bible of Darkness would deter him from casually starting a fight. After the demons left the battlefield, the surviving humans all breathed out a sigh of relief. They then began reorganizing their formation and treating the injured. A large number of people also gathered by Angelica Teresa's side with downcast and unreconciled expressions. This was because the female knight's mental state and soul had already reached the brink of collapse, despite her having a lot of HP remaining. This was clear even to the Tier 3 individuals present. "Commander. It's all our fault. If we weren't so useless, the commander wouldn't have had to use the aria of holy blood. Damn it. Someone in the city must have leaked information on our operation. Otherwise, Neiman Carlo couldn't have led an army to surround us." Both NPCs and players present expressed sadness when they saw Angelica's current state. It was evident the female knight was loved and respected by these people. Unlike players, it was incredibly difficult for NPCs to get resurrected. "Big Sis Cloud, what should we do now? The commander won't last at this rate," Yu Luo said while frantically casting healing spells on Angelica. However, healing spells worked on only physical injuries. They had no effect on damage to one's mental state and soul. Commander Angelica Teresa was the only hope for their main city's survival. In this world, both NPCs and players had difficulty surviving because this world was several times crueler than the modern god's domain. It was also because of Angelica that Yu Luo had managed to live well until this day. Yet, now, there's nothing we can do. The aria of Holy Blood's backlash is too powerful. The fact that the commander managed to cast it once is already plenty amazing. Yet, after using the spell, she even used a taboo skill that placed a huge burden on the mental state. Now, even a Tier 4 Great Divine Official can't save her, Cooling Cloud said as she shook her head, a gloomy expression appearing on her face. While the two Tier 3 healers, Yu Luo and Cooling Cloud, were doing everything they could to save Angelica Teresa. Shifeng, who watched all of this from a distance, was filled with an indescribable sense of shock and surprise. She's actually Angelica Teresa. Shifeng couldn't help doubting his eyes for a moment as he gazed at the frail female knight. What's the matter, Commander? Solitary 9 asked curiously when he noticed Shifeng's surprise. In Solitary 9's opinion, there shouldn't be anything in God's domain capable of surprising Shifeng. Yet, now, the man actually evinced surprise because of an NPC. This was a truly strange situation. Have you never visited a library to read about God's domain's history during your free time? Shifeng rolled his eyes at Solitary 9. She is the Angelica Teresa. She holds the title of Valkyrie and is one of the 2 founding elders of the Fire Dragon Empire. She's a founding member of one of the 4 ancient countries. Solitary 9 did a double take at Angelica Teresa when he heard Shifeng's words. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The 4 ancient countries of the modern God's domain were the only 4 human empires that had existed since the ancient era. According to legend, the founding emperors of these empires possessed incredible power. In the case of the Fire Dragon Empire, though, a large part of the reason it survived the ancient era was the contributions of its 2 founding elders, and even gods feared these 2 founding elders. However, by the looks of it, she seems to be dying, Lifeless Thorn said in a quiet tone. Maybe she just has the same name. No, she is definitely that person, Shifeng affirmed. The sacred sword Blood Moon is ranked 6th among God's domain's famed swords. It is said that this sword once belonged to Angelica Teresa, one of the Fire Dragon Empire's founding elders. While a person can have the same name, the chances are low that she would wield the same weapon. God's domain's 36 famed swords were unique existences, and their owners were all historical figures in God's domain. In other words, it was precisely because of the people wielding these swords that the swords became unique existences known throughout God's domain. What should we do now, then? If she dies, will it alter God's domain's history? Solitary 9 asked anxiously. At this point, he still couldn't tell whether they had arrived in the real ancient era of God's domain or just a replica. If it was a fake, then good. If it was real, then the results would be very bad. No sooner had Solitary 9 finished speaking than the system's cold, mechanical voice entered Shifeng's ears. Chapter 2769, Inferior Mythic Quest System, Warning. Warning. System, you have triggered an optional Inferior Mythic World quest. Quest content, assist Angelica Teresa to become Meteorite City's Lord. Rewards 1 unknown item and God's Domain World Authority +2. Penalties unknown. System, you have 30 seconds to consider. Quest will be accepted by default if no response is made. An inferior mythic quest. Shifeng couldn't help doubting his ears when he heard the system. As far as he knew, legendary main storyline quests were already the most challenging quests players could pick up. However, there were quests of a higher grade than legendary main storyline quests, mythic quests, which had always been a mystery of God's domain. Despite the rumors of mythic quests, nobody had ever personally verified their existence. Yet, he had now triggered an inferior mythic quest. Do I accept it? Shifeng hesitated. This was most likely the only opportunity he would ever get to challenge such a quest. After all, he had never even heard of anybody receiving a quest of this rank. He had most likely triggered such a quest only because he happened to visit God's domain's ancient era and came across a key historical figure. Moreover, by the looks of it, the other players around him had not received this quest. This meant he had satisfied some unknown conditions to trigger this quest. Only, the penalty for failing a legendary quest was already more than enough to end a player's career in God's domain. The penalty for failing an inferior mythic quest would most likely be several times greater. If he failed to complete the quest after accepting it. However, when he saw the reward of God's domain's world authority +2, greed momentarily overwhelmed him. In the present God's domain, everyone else was probably unaware of God's domain's world authority, as it was simply far too difficult to obtain. Normally, players had to have achievements that affected the entirety of God's domain to acquire this world authority. Players who successfully obtained world authority, even if only 1 point of it, would receive unimaginable assistance in their progression in God's domain. Just like the name suggested, gaining world authority meant one would become an existence with special rights in God's domain. The various superpowers were willing to go all out and risk incurring massive losses just to obtain the special rights the war god's temple offered. After all, obtaining these rights meant one's guild could surpass other guilds by a large margin and solidify its position in God's domain. Individual players could also obtain special rights in God's domain. This was world authority. Obtaining even 1 point of world authority was equivalent to attaining God's domain's recognition. Players with world authority would then gain an unimaginable affinity with the world. On the surface, gaining an increased affinity with the world might not seem very useful. However, it would provide players with a clearer perception of the various magic elements and their operating principles. This was crucial for players aiming to reach Tier 6. In the past, for the sake of producing Tier 6 God-ranked players, the various super guilds were willing to do everything they could just to help a select few of their members gain world authority. However, even the 5 great super guilds had managed to gather only a handful of world authority points after struggling for 4 or 5 years. Nevertheless, it was also a fact that every player that obtained world authority points had reached Tier 6. Now that Shifeng had the opportunity to obtain 2 world authority points just by completing 1 quest, how could he not feel greedy? If he succeeded, let alone Tier 5, even getting promoted to Tier 6 would become a lot easier. "Commander, are you alright?" Yenya asked worriedly when she noticed Shifeng's strange expression. "Did you consume too much concentration after using that combat technique just now?" Previously, Shifeng had exhausted himself during the fight with Tidelia. Although they had taken a small break afterward, the amount of concentration he managed to recover was most likely limited. "I'm fine," Shifeng said, shaking his head. He then looked toward Angelica Teresa, who currently lay weakly on the ground, and gritted his teeth. "It seems I have no choice but to help her." Truthfully, he didn't wish to take part in this matter. After all, the old man from before had emphasized that if he overdid things here, the world would quickly discover his existence and forcibly return him to the modern world. If that happened, it would be a huge loss for him. After all, the environment here was truly wonderful. Moreover, God's domain's ancient era was far superior to the modern era in many aspects. The available legacies aside, just the materials, weapons, and equipment available here were already leaps and bounds superior to the modern God's domain. At this point, he had yet to find out how he could earn a large amount of resources from this ancient era, so he naturally couldn't recklessly take action. This was also why he had chosen to chase away Neiman Carlo instead of killing the great demon. Needless to say, he also wished to avoid saving the NPCs of this era if possible. This was especially true for a big shot like Angelica Teresa. Steady progression was the way to go in God's domain. However, the quest rewards were far too generous. Even if it meant taking a huge risk, Shifeng still planned to give it a try. After all, in his current state, he really wasn't confident of getting promoted to Tier 5. If he merely relied on legacy guidances, constructing even a completely new mana body would be tough, let alone constructing a mana body that matched the physique of Tier 5 monsters. Ultimately, Shifeng walked up to Angelica Teresa, his actions causing the other people present to grow alert. Although Shifeng had repelled the demon army for them, he was still a foreign powerhouse. Their wariness of him was only natural. After all, there were many insidious people in God's domain who were capable of stabbing others in the back with a smiling face. No one wouldn't be completely safe from such people, regardless of one's identity. The best example would be their commander. Their commander possessed a great reputation in their city. Most of the city's big shots respected and favored her, yet she still ended up getting stabbed in the back. Upon seeing Shifeng walk over, Yuluo gritted her teeth and asked in a quiet tone, "Guild leader Black Flame, do you have a way to save our commander?" "So long as you can save the commander, I will help you with whatever you want. Even if it means sacrificing myself." In reality, Yu Luo did not think Shifeng would have a way to save Commander Angelica Teresa. After all, even Cooling Cloud, who was both a skillful healer and advanced master alchemist, was helpless. I indeed have a way to save her. However, I don't need you to sacrifice yourself or anything of the sort. Shifeng smiled involuntarily when he saw the resolution on Yu Luo's face. I just need you to tell me about the situation here once afterward. Even if Yu Luo didn't ask for his help, he would still save Angelica Teresa. After all, a dead person couldn't become the overlord of Meteorite City. You have a way to save the commander, guild leader Black Flame? Yu Luo was momentarily stunned by Shifeng's reply. However, she quickly recollected herself and said excitedly, no problem. So long as it is something I know, I will definitely tell you. On the other hand, Cooling Cloud, who stood at his side, was confused when she heard Shifeng's confident reply. She was an advanced master alchemist, yet even she was helpless about Angelica's situation. She found it truly hard to believe a fellow countryman of Yu Luo's had a way to save the commander. This wasn't because Cooling Cloud was belittling Shifeng and Yu Luo, but because the knowledge Yu Luo had shown regarding God's domain was simply too inadequate. Even her usage of skills and spells was crude. In addition, while it wasn't necessary for all healers to become a specialized master alchemist, it was still common sense for healers to know how to craft some potions. Yet, Yu Luo did not. Hence, Cooling Cloud concluded that Yu Luo and Shifeng came from some backwoods. Otherwise, they shouldn't lack such common sense. However, Shifeng did not respond to Yu Luo's question. He merely took out a translucent crystal from his bag and passed it to her. Have her eat this. She'll gradually recover once she does, Shifeng said without further explanation. Yu Luo was confused when she received the translucent crystal from Shifeng, not understanding how such a crystal could save Commander Angelica. However, when Cooling Cloud saw the crystal in Yu Luo's hand, she was shocked. A crystal of souls. How is this possible? At Cooling Cloud's exclamation, the other healers present stared at Shifeng as if they were looking at a monster. Big Sis Cloud, is this crystal of souls something amazing? Yu Luo asked, bewildered. Realizing that she had lost her composure, Cooling Cloud quickly calmed herself, then explained, the crystal of souls isn't just valuable. It is incomparably rare even on the scale of the entire God's domain. The Holy City's side can secure only a few of such crystals, as they are simply too rare. Normally, such crystals appear in places where souls gather, such as the Netherworld. These crystals can not only heal one's mental state but also strengthen the soul to a certain degree. It is impossible to purchase a crystal of souls on the market, and it is many times more valuable than even the water of life. It's such a rare item. Yu Luo was startled. She never thought Shifeng would actually use such a precious item to save someone. With this, she would owe him a massive favor. Alright, you'd best save her first, Shifeng said. When he saw the astonished looks everyone was giving him, he only shook his head and smiled. The crystal of souls was indeed precious. Under normal circumstances, he wouldn't be willing to use it. After all, he had to rely on himself to harvest the necessary monster souls to create crystals of souls. However, the crystals weren't so precious that he couldn't afford to waste them on others. After all, the soul orb was one of the 7 treasures that could easily produce crystals of souls. He merely needed to kill Great Lord-ranked monsters 5 levels higher than himself to obtain the necessary monster souls. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU at Shifeng's reminder, Yu Luo quickly snapped out of her daze and helped Angelica consume the crystal of souls. Shortly afterward, Angelica's complexion recovered significantly. Although she had fallen unconscious after consuming the crystal of souls, one could tell that her condition was no longer critical. Now, all they needed to do was wait. By the time Angelica woke up on her own, she would be thoroughly recovered. Meanwhile, after seeing that Angelica was saved, Cooling Cloud, as a captain in the Night Legion, took the initiative to invite Shifeng's party to rest in Meteorite City, the main city they resided in. Shifeng did not refuse the invitation, as he was curious to learn more about God's domain's ancient era. The human army walked for over a dozen hours before eventually arriving before a stalwart mountain range. A city that was more spectacular than even the royal capitals found in the modern god's domain appeared inside the valley of this mountain range. Chapter 2770, City of Riches. Meteorite City. Meteorite wasn't just a gathering place in the Meteorite mountain range for humans to live and conduct trade in. It was also the safest location for humans in the Meteorite mountain range. After the Night Legion registered the information of Shi Feng's party with the city, Cooling Cloud led the five straight into the city. Meanwhile, as Shi Feng and his party members were non-residents of Meteorite City, they each had to pay an entrance fee of 5 magic crystals. Let alone Lifeless Thorn and the others, even Shi Feng was stunned by this fraudulent price. Meteorite City's entrance fee was more than 10 times greater than the various guild cities, not to mention that of modern NPC cities. At this point, the market value of magic crystals had already risen to 40 silver per crystal. 5 magic crystals was the equivalent of 2 gold. Unless the city's mana had condensed into a liquid state, only a fool would pay such an entrance fee. However, from the behavior of the NPCs and players here, it looked as if they had long since gotten used to this situation. Even Yu Luo paid the 5 magic crystals without hesitation. Guild leader Black Flame, this is the standard price here. Naturally, Yu Luo could tell what was going through the minds of Shi Feng's party. Smiling, she whispered, but please believe me that this price is absolutely reasonable. Initially, she, too, had been shocked by this price. After all, she wasn't the guild leader of a guild, unlike Shi Feng, but merely a team leader in an adventurer team. The magic crystals she had on hand had only numbered 200 or so. Paying 5 magic crystals just to enter a city had been an extravagant expenditure for her. However, after entering Meteorite City, she quickly realized that this price was definitely reasonable. Compared to the NPC main cities in the modern god's domain, Meteorite City could practically be considered a holy city. Of course, Shi Feng wouldn't dwell on this matter. After all, 5 magic crystals was basically nothing to him. He was merely surprised by the absurd entrance fee. Afterward, Shi Feng paid the entrance fee for his party of 5, then followed Cooling Cloud and Yu Luo through the magic array that enveloped Meteorite City. This is a main city of the ancient era. When Shi Feng set foot in Meteorite City, a comfortable feeling immediately enveloped his body. This comfortable feeling was different from the kind of comfort he felt when entering a place with high mana density. Instead, entering this city allowed him to have a clearer perception of the world. Particularly, his perception of the various magic elements had sharpened over twofold. When he had first arrived in the ancient era, he had already sensed a significant improvement in his affinity with magic elements. If he could train in the environment here, he was confident that not only could he break through his mana body's 100% threshold, but his efficiency in learning magic arrays, skills, and spells would also double or triple. This was a wondrous place for development. Nonetheless, the environment inside Meteorite City was actually significantly better than the environment outside. In fact, Shi Feng even had a hunch that if he used a legacy guidance here, he could exceed his mana body's 100% limit in just a few days. The magic array protecting the city is personally crafted by a human saint. Not only does it have strong defensive properties, but it even improves the mana perception of the city's inhabitants. However, operating this magic array requires a lot of magic crystals, hence the entrance fee, Yu Luo explained. Actually, Meteorite City's big trade market and huge population flow have already helped reduce the entrance fee. Some cities even charge 7 or 8 magic crystals. No wonder you managed to improve your control over mana so much, Shi Feng said in realization as he looked at Yu Luo. Yu Luo had already unlocked her mana body's potential to 100%, and her control over mana had even reached the Master Magician standard. If her concentration standard reached Tier 4, she would be able to form her own mana domain and become top tier among Tier 3 peak experts. Most domain realm experts hadn't even reached the Master Magician standard at this stage of the game. And although Yu Luo was very talented, she was still far from comparable to Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow. Yet, even with his help, those two were still half a step away from becoming Master Magicians, so how could Yu Luo possibly overtake them? The only explanation was the environment here. I've improved a lot after arriving here, Yu Luo said as she nodded confidently. That's right. Yu Luo has been improving rapidly during this period. Now, she can already rank among the Night Legion's top 5 healers, Cooling Cloud said, nodding. Although she didn't have a high opinion of Yu Luo's initial strength, she very much acknowledged the cleric's talent. Actually, it is all thanks to Lady Angelica's teachings, Yu Luo said. At the mention of Angelica Teresa, an expression of gratitude and admiration appeared on her face. It's a pity that we failed to complete the quest this time. Had we succeeded, Lady Angelica might have become the Lord of Meteorite City. If the city comes under Lady Angelica's leadership, the city will prosper and possibly even rank up into an advanced main city. Become the Lord? What kind of quest is she trying to do? Shi Feng asked curiously. His inferior mythic quest had stated that he needed to help Angelica Teresa become Meteorite City's lord. Now that a clue on how he could do so had appeared, he naturally was curious. It's nothing. Everyone in the city already knows about it at this point. Since Shi Feng expressed interest in this topic, Cooling Cloud explained slowly, Meteorite City has been developing for hundreds of years already, and its population and scale of operation have grown significantly. However, at this point, the city has reached a bottleneck. The old city lord also abdicated recently. As one of the candidates to replace the lord, Lady Angelica Teresa wishes to improve Meteorite City. Meanwhile, there are 2 ways to help Meteorite City develop further. The first is to expand the city. However, the city's magic array was personally established by the saint, and nobody in the city is capable of modifying it. The only way to modify the magic array is to go to the holy city and meet with the saint. The chances of success are dismal. Setting aside how far away the holy city is, just trying to meet with the saint is already an incredibly difficult task. Hence, Lady Angelica can only resort to the second method, strengthening the magic array's core, which would, in turn, upgrade the magic array. Recently, we received news that a Tier 4 infant dragon appeared over at the Ghostfire Hills. If we can hunt this infant dragon and secure its dragon eyes and dragon crystal, we can strengthen the magic array's core. Only, at this point, Cooling Cloud sighed. Let alone hunting that Tier 4 infant dragon, they had already fallen prey to a demon army's ambush shortly after leaving Meteorite City. What followed next was what Shi Feng himself had witnessed. Travel to the holy city to meet with the saint or kill a Tier 4 infant dragon? Shi Feng shook his head and smiled bitterly at Cooling Cloud's words. Although he didn't know where the holy city was, since the NPC cities here had no teleportation arrays linking them, the journey to the holy city could easily take several months. Moreover, even after arriving at the holy city, it wouldn't necessarily be possible to meet with the rumored saint. As for the other option of killing a Tier 4 infant dragon, that was even more ludicrous. A Tier 4 infant dragon was an existence above even demon princes. It was an existence that could truly match Tier 5 existences. When Shi Feng was in his Tier 4 legacy land, even after reaching Tier 4 and gaining a Tier 4 legacy skill, he could only put up a fight against the Tier 3 infant dragons there. Even with the Heavenly Dragon Breath's help, he still couldn't kill those Tier 3 infant dragons. Now, Angelica Teresa actually had designs on a Tier 4 infant dragon despite being only at Tier 4 herself. Calling her actions suicidal would be an understatement. Moreover, killing the infant dragon probably had to be done as soon as possible. After all, dragons did not have the habit of living in a fixed location long term. If he couldn't help Angelica kill the infant dragon before it went elsewhere, he would have to look for the elusive saint. Sure enough, this isn't a quest that can be completed easily. However, Shi Feng did not feel particularly surprised by this situation. A legendary quest was already monumentally difficult to complete, an inferior mythic quest would only be worse. He also had to admit that Angelica Teresa matched the legends, which portrayed her as a brave warrior who stood up against dragons. If Angelica succeeded in slaying a Tier 4 infant dragon despite being at Tier 4 herself, that would truly be a legendary feat. The only thing Shi Feng could do now was look for opportunities to improve both his and his party's strength. Otherwise, he would be utterly helpless against the infant dragon. Under Cooling Cloud and Yu Luo's lead, Shifeng's party arrived at Meteorite City's trade market. When Lifeless Thorn and the others saw the dazzling items put up for sale, their eyes widened in shock. The basic currency used in the market here was actually the magic crystal. Coins did not exist here. However, they also had to acknowledge that the ancient era of God's domain was truly amazing. The NPCs here even sold epic weapons and equipment players could use. Only, the price was somewhat high. Even a random piece of level 150 epic equipment sold for 20,000 magic crystals. If converted to the gold coins used in the modern era, that would be equivalent to 8,000 gold per piece of level 150 epic equipment. While the various super guilds would kill to purchase level 150 epic equipment for 8,000 gold, it was a different story if the payment had to be in magic crystals. In addition to epic equipment, fragmented legendary weapons and equipment occasionally appeared in Meteorite City's auction house, which the various player forces in Meteorite City competed for. Only, one needed a minimum deposit of 300,000 magic crystals just to participate in the auction. Meanwhile, these fragmented legendary items usually ended up selling for over 400,000 magic crystals. Whether it was Lifeless Thorn or Shifeng, they couldn't help feeling like they had become beggars after entering Meteorite City. Although Shifeng carried some magic crystals with him, that number was only 50,000, just enough to purchase 2 pieces of epic equipment, at most, here. Of course, it was also much easier to earn magic crystals here than in the modern God's domain since the magic crystal was the main currency used in the ancient era. Whether one completed quests or traded materials with NPCs, payment was in magic crystals. Hence, local players found the prices of the epic and fragmented legendary items reasonable. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. After walking around for several hours, Cooling Cloud bid goodbye to Shifeng's party since she still had matters to deal with as a captain in the local Night Legion. As for Yu Luo, she stayed behind to serve as a tour guide for Shifeng's party. Inside a high-class hotel in Meteorite City. Staying in one of the ordinary rooms here cost 50 magic crystals a day, while the high-end rooms cost 200 magic crystals per day. Shifeng chose to rent a high-end room without hesitation. Shortly afterward, Shifeng's party of 5 and Yu Luo sat quietly inside the room. Out with it. How long has it been since you arrived here? Shifeng asked seriously as he looked at Yu Luo. What's up with the players here? Chapter 2771, Alien-like players. At Shifeng's question, an exceptional silence filled the room. Lifeless Thorn and the others simultaneously focused their gaze on Yu Luo. Ever since they arrived in this place, they had come across too many unknown and surprising matters. However, the only thing they could do was remain silent and quietly observe everything, including the so-called NPCs and players here. In their opinion, be it the NPCs, monsters, or players here, they all felt alien. This was especially true for the players here. Despite being players, the players here gave them a completely different feeling than the members of their party. It felt as if the players here were not players at all, but rather the original inhabitants of this world. It was as if these players had already accepted this virtual world as their own. No. To be precise, these players treated the world of God's domain as a real world. Moreover, judging by these players' behavior, they had resided in this world for a considerably long period. Otherwise, the alien feeling they gave off wouldn't be so conspicuous. This alien feeling was especially familiar to Shifeng. Looking at the players in this ancient era felt like looking at Phoenix Rain back when he met her in Flame Dragon City. It was just that Phoenix Rain seemed more alien back then than these people. She felt as if she was a player yet not a player at the same time. In short, she gave off a very strange feeling. Now, the players here gave him a similar feeling. Hence, the shock he felt when he met these players initially was much greater compared to that of Lifeless Thorn and the others. However, he couldn't openly state his feelings. After all, the matter concerning Phoenix Rain was of great importance. Moreover, at the same time as their party was finding the players here alien, these players had similarly noticed the strangeness of their party. It was evident that these players were foreign to players like their party as well. In addition, through the previous conversation he had with Cooling Cloud, Shurfeng got the impression that they lived in completely different worlds. The old man in the cave had already stated that this world was the ancient era of God's domain. Logically, there shouldn't be any other players in this world. Yet, not only were there players living in this world, but there were even a large number of them. Based on his initial estimates, there should be well over 5 million players residing in Meteorite City. This was already on the level of royal capitals in the modern era. Meanwhile, according to Cooling Cloud, there were at least 500 such main cities on the continent. If Meteorite City was representative of these main cities, there should be well over 2.5 billion players in the ancient era. Yet, none of the various powers in the real world had an inkling that there were players playing in the ancient era of God's domain. That's right. Everything is as you guys have guessed. When Yu Luo saw the look everyone was giving her, her originally light and happy expression instantly vanished, replaced by a solemn expression. Whether it is this God's domain or the players here, both come from a different world from ours. A different world? Solitary Nine's breathing grew heavy at Yu Luo's words. How is this possible? Although he had already had suspicions, he still found it unbelievable after hearing Yu Luo's confirmation. While it was indeed true that God's domain was a virtual reality game like no other, it was still far-fetched to say that people of a different world were playing the game with them. No, it would be somewhat incorrect to say that they're from a different world. Shaking her head, Yu Luo smiled and added, to be precise, they are people living in a different world. What do you mean? Shurfeng asked curiously. You should know of the migration plan that took place 100 years ago, right? Of course, we know. Back then, due to a shortage of resources and the worsening environmental pollution, Earth had gradually become unsuitable for human life. Hence, a migration plan was executed. I heard that many people at that time were sent out to explore the universe for habitable planets, Solitary Nine answered, nodding. Could it be? Are you saying these players are the people who were sent out? Yes. They are the descendants of those explorers, Yu Luo said. Back then, Earth had already discovered several habitable planets. However, they were too distant from Earth, and the journey would take a long time. Hence, after gathering all of the world's power, several hundred interstellar spaceships with self-sustaining environments were constructed. These spaceships then set forth toward the selected habitable planets while carrying all sorts of resources and hundreds of millions of Earth's outstanding personnel. These people have been living on the interstellar spaceships for these past 100 years. However, these people experienced a much longer time than people on Earth during their journey. I heard that they've been living in space for over 600 years. Some spaceships have even experienced over 900 years of life. The population on these spaceships has also continued to grow over time, with the total population having exceeded 10 billion long ago. The original spaceships have also acquired resources from various planets on the way and modified and upgraded themselves. At this point, these spaceships can no longer be considered mere spaceships but more like interstellar continents. And they are still making their way to the habitable planets. However, as these interstellar continents had limited resources, the majority of their population can only reside in virtual worlds. Only a small minority has the privilege to roam the outside world. Hence, these people are accustomed to virtual worlds. The professional players of our worlds can't even compare to these people in this regard, as virtual worlds have long since become a part of these people's lives. After God's domain's launch, the game became their everything. The understanding they have of God's domain far exceeds ours. When Yu Luo finished speaking, silence enveloped the room for a long time. Solitary Nine and the others even had their mouths hanging wide open. They never thought that they would actually be ignorant of such a huge matter happening outside Earth. They also couldn't even begin to imagine how it felt to live out in the open universe for several centuries. I see. After hearing Yu Luo's explanation, Shurfeng came to another realization. During his previous life, right before he reincarnated, God's domain had suddenly launched an expansion pack for seemingly no rhyme or reason. It was the most special expansion pack ever added to the game. Normally, the main god system would first implement a new expansion pack in the game before notifying players about it. However, news of this expansion pack had spread in the real world before its implementation. In fact, even its name had been revealed beforehand. War of Worlds. The description that came with this announcement also clearly stated that there would be several worlds attacking the main continent of God's domain. For the sake of their own survival, these worlds would wage war with each other on an unprecedented scale. The winner would live, and the loser would die. This announcement had agitated countless people in God's domain when it came out. After all, the territories on the main continent were basically fixed at that point, and few disputes occurred between the various powers. The game had been trending towards stability. With the sudden appearance of several new worlds, how could the players of God's domain not feel excited? The various major powers, in particular, had immediately begun sharpening their blades after the announcement. So long as the new expansion pack took place, they would immediately invade these new worlds and start a new journey. However, as a consequence of the expansion pack, Shifeng found himself fired. Upon seeing the stunned expressions of the people around her, Yuluo revealed a bitter smile and said, "My arrival here was a complete accident. While exploring an underground space in Dragonheart City by myself, I got caught in a space-time storm. By the time I woke up, I was already in this place. Currently, I have spent 20 days here already. Although I want to go back, I haven't been able to return even after dying or jumping into other space-time storms. What's most frustrating is that I can't log out of the game from here." "You can't log out?" At Yu Luo's words, Solitary 9 and the others hurriedly checked whether they could log out or not. If they couldn't, then it would be a huge problem. Nowadays, all virtual gaming cabins had a nutrient solution storage that could let players stay online for 1 or 2 months without any problem. The latest model could even let players stay online for 3 months. And in the event that players depleted their supply of nutrient solution and couldn't leave their gaming cabin for some reason, the cabin would issue a system alert, and professionals would come quickly to deal with the problem. Hence, players had no need to worry about starving to death. Even so, this wasn't good news. "No way. I really can't log out." Solitary 9 couldn't help growing anxious. It would be very inconvenient for them if they couldn't go offline. After all, there were many things they needed to do in the real world. Moreover, staying online long-term would affect their physical bodies to a certain degree. They can't log out. Looking at the Log Out button on his system interface, Shifeng found that it was still brightly lit, indicating that he could go offline whenever he wanted. Is it because of that world stone in my bag? After some thought, the only explanation Shifeng could come up with for this situation was the world stone. After all, this item could stabilize the principle of all things, which meant that he should be able to bypass the rules of this world. With this, it seems I don't need to be too anxious. While the ancient god's domain was indeed excellent, he also had many things he needed to do in the real world. He couldn't stay online long-term. With the world stone, he could now feel relieved. Shifeng then conversed with Yu Luo about the basic information of this world, particularly about information relating to legacies. After the conversation, Lifeless Thorn and the others sighed ruefully. The ancient god's domain was indeed different. Compared to the modern god's domain, the players living in the ancient god's domain had a much easier time getting promoted. With a reliable team, players had no problem at all securing a complete Tier 3 legacy. In fact, with enough rare materials, one could even seek out a Tier 3 instructor to exchange for a complete legacy. The only limitation of this method was that players could only exchange up to 3 legacies. As for the promotion to Tier 4, while it was significantly more difficult than that to Tier 3, it was still much easier compared to the process in the modern god's domain. At the very least, players didn't have to seek out a legacy land in the middle of nowhere. They could simply head to a Tier 4 instructor and choose to challenge their Tier 4 promotion quest. They would then be teleported to a Tier 4 legacy space. However, the cost of this method was high. Each challenge required the payment of 15,000 magic crystals. The difficulty of the promotion quest was the same as in modern times. Players still had to learn a Tier 4 legacy skill or spell during the allotted time. Failure meant having to wait 20 natural days before they could re-challenge it. At this time, only 3 players in Meteorite City had successfully reached Tier 4. At this point, Shifeng wished he could bring all of Zero Wing's Tier 4 Flowing Water Realm experts and above to this place. Even if it meant spending a lot of magic crystals, it would still be much better than searching for a legacy land. After all, searching for a legacy land was not only time-consuming, but success was also highly dependent on luck. If word of this matter got out in the modern gods' domain, every power across the continent would most likely do everything they could to secure this opportunity. Commander, can I borrow 10,000 magic crystals from you? Lifeless Thorn asked as he looked at Shifeng. I'll pay you back double as soon as we return. Commander, you can't play favorites. Solitary 9 objected hurriedly, knowing that Shifeng did not bring a lot of magic crystals with him to the ancient god's domain. Every bit given away counted. Meanwhile, Yenya and Cleansing Whistle also stared at Shifeng with eloquent eyes. Relax. Shifeng smiled spontaneously when he saw everyone's reactions. Although I didn't bring a lot of magic crystals with me, I still have a way to let each of you challenge your promotion quests once. You can challenge yours as well, Yu Luo. Me? Yu Luo was stunned by Shifeng's words. But I don't have that many magic crystals. She, too, yearned to challenge her Tier 4 promotion quest. However, it wasn't easy to save up magic crystals while living in Meteorite City, as everything cost magic crystals here. Even until now, she had only around 4,000 magic crystals, still far off from the 15,000 required. So long as you help me with a matter, I'll pay you 15,000 magic crystals as remuneration. How about it? Shifeng asked as he looked at Yu Luo. The ancient god's domain was a massive treasure trove, its value easily billions of times greater than a grade 1 or vein. It was no wonder 3 of the 5 great super guilds had deemed it worthwhile to work together to seal off the Earthfall's secret land. If such a secret became public, the consequences would be unimaginable. Of course, acquiring the various resources of the ancient god's domain wouldn't be an easy task either, since the base currency used here was the magic crystal, something relatively rare in the modern god's domain. And while the ancient god's domain had an abundance of magic crystals, it would be nigh impossible for modern players to earn a large amount of magic crystals here. After all, the modern god's domain was inferior to the ancient god's domain in almost every aspect. For players living in the modern god's domain, visiting the ancient god's domain would be equivalent to Stone Age people visiting the modern era. Modern players would need to work hard to earn magic crystals here. Fortunately, it wasn't completely impossible for modern players to earn money in the ancient era. One way to do so would be to take advantage of the unskillful handling of problems relating to the mind and soul in the ancient god's domain, particularly when it came to healing one's mental state. The ancient god's domain was actually far weaker than the modern god's domain in this aspect. This point was obvious from the gap between the concentration recovery potions sold on the market and those made by Cooling Cloud, an advanced master alchemist. In short, there were very few methods available for players to recover their concentration. Moreover, the death penalty here even placed players in a mentally weakened state for long periods, which prevented them from exhibiting their full strength. This meant that methods that could help heal the soul and mind were incredibly valuable. Okay. Yu Luo agreed immediately, understanding that Shifeng was trying to help her. What do you need me to do? Taking out a crystal of souls from his bag, Shifeng said, take this crystal of souls and consign it to the auction house for now. You're a member of the local Night Legion, so you should be able to spread information about it quickly. Just say that this is the crystal of souls that healed Angelica Teresa and that it has a minor soul-strengthening effect, which can increase one's chances of passing the Tier 4 promotion quest. Can you do that? No problem. If it is only publicizing the crystal, I can probably inform the whole city in just a few hours, Yu Luo said, nodding as she accepted the crystal of souls. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. She had personally witnessed the Crystal of Souls' effects, so she knew that Shifeng was indeed telling the truth. As for the aid the crystal could provide in the Tier 4 promotion quest, it was partly true. After all, if one's soul got strengthened, one's learning ability would improve as well. Hence, it couldn't be considered an outright lie. Meanwhile, spreading this news throughout the city was a piece of cake for her as a member of the local Night Legion. Yu Luo left the hotel room to get the word out, while Lifeless Thorn and the others went to their respective rooms to sort out their thoughts and prepare themselves to challenge their Tier 4 promotion quests. Once Shifeng was alone in his room, he took out a memory crystal from his bag. This crystal was none other than the complete legacy guidance crystal he had obtained from killing Tidelia. The effects of this room sure are excellent. My perception is strengthened by a further 30% compared to the outside world. Now that I have some time to myself, I can give it a try. Immediately afterward, Shifeng took out 100 magic crystals and activated the Legacy Guidance Crystal. Chapter 2772, Breakthrough inside the quiet and spacious living room. As Shifeng continuously poured mana into the Legacy Guidance Crystal in his hand, divine runes and magic arrays began appearing all over the crystal one after another. A short moment later, the mana inside the room started surging toward the memory crystal. Afterward, the crystal radiated a dark blue glow that enveloped Shifeng. What a powerful legacy! Shifeng was astonished when the blue light engulfed him. This was because the owner of this legacy wasn't an ordinary person but someone known as the Saint of the Ice World. The quality of this legacy was far superior to that of ordinary legacies. In addition, the Ice World Saint's legacy explained a lot about the ice element's operating principles and described some basic methods to construct one's mana body using the ice element as the basis. This sort of legacy guidance was incredibly rare in God's domain. In most cases, legacy guidances only provided a demonstration of the manipulation of magic elements and some explanations of their operating principles. The chances of a legacy guidance containing a demonstration of how to construct a mana body from scratch were less than 0.1%, let alone a saint's guidance and demonstration. Existences holding the title of saint were either gods or existences approaching gods. Some saints were even existences that gods feared greatly because a saint represented the epitome of a certain aspect in God's domain. Not even gods could match a saint in their specialty. In other words, while a saint could be a god wouldn't necessarily be a saint. The requirement to become a Tier 6 god wasn't to achieve the extreme of a certain aspect. Instead, one only needed to reach a certain threshold. As to what that threshold was, only those who had actually reached Tier 6 would know. Meanwhile, the Ice World Saint had undoubtedly attained the ultimate in the manipulation of the ice element. Hence, the Ice World Saint's control over the ice element was undoubtedly superior to everyone else's. Even gods wouldn't be a match for the Ice World Saint. Following this, time passed by, second after second. As Shifeng injected more mana into the memory crystal, the Ice World Saint's demonstration sped up. The information the saint conveyed also became increasingly complicated. Half an hour later, the saint's demonstration ended. Shifeng, who had been focused on the demonstration the entire time, felt mesmerized by the information he learned. What a pity! The guidance barely talked about elements other than the ice element. If the guidance for the other elements were as detailed as the one for the ice element, my control over the magic elements would definitely reach the Grandmaster standard. At that time, I might even stand a chance against superior mythic monsters. Shifeng sighed ruefully when the demonstration video disappeared. He had to admit that the existences granted the title of saint were indeed powerful. Saints who had reached the ultimate in control of a specific magic element were especially amazing. Their understanding and explanation of magic elements were incredibly enlightening. However, the Ice World Saint's explanation became increasingly complicated as it progressed, and Shifeng found himself struggling to understand the lecture. It felt as if the saint's explanation had gone from talking about 1 dimension to 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions to 4 dimensions. He could still understand up to the 3rd dimension, but when the explanation progressed to the 4th dimension, his mind failed to comprehend the saint's thinking. Despite understanding the surface meaning of the saint's words, he couldn't understand how to apply them in practice. Hence, Shi Feng could only treat the magic element usage methods explained at the end as gibberish. Nevertheless, he had still made massive gains. At the very least, he had made qualitative improvements in manipulating and understanding the ice element. Now, all he needed to do was experiment with his newfound knowledge. This Ice World Saint's legacy is truly extraordinary. I will have to get Violet Cloud and the others to study it earnestly. It would simply go to waste if given to someone without an affinity with the ice element. Shi Feng now placed even greater importance on the legacy guidance crystal in his hand. He wouldn't have if it were any other legacy guidance, but this was a saint's guidance they were talking about. The Ice World Saint's guidance even provided such detailed information about the magic elements. Giving this legacy guidance to someone without an affinity with the magic elements would be a complete and utter waste. In fact, had he used this legacy guidance crystal in the modern god's domain instead of the ancient god's domain, he would have wasted a precious opportunity. If the information he absorbed from watching the legacy guidance here consisted of only 20% of the total information, then he probably would have failed to comprehend even 5% of the information had he watched it in the modern god's domain. After all, he didn't possess much affinity with the ice element, he was much more attuned to the fire element. Fortunately, the environment in the ancient god's domain was excellent, and it drastically improved his affinity with and perception of the ice element. Now, he could perceive the ice element much more clearly than he could the fire element when he was in the modern god's domain. After absorbing the Ice World Saint's legacy guidance, Shi Feng took out a drop of soul water and drank it, boosting his concentration recovery and energizing his brain. Immediately afterward, he began attempting to break through his mana body's 100% threshold by constructing a new and simpler control array to link and control the various magic arrays all over his mana body. Previously, I insisted on using only one mana manipulation method to control the magic arrays of my body. On the other hand, the Ice World Saint constructed his mana body with the ice element and used several mana manipulation methods to gather and manipulate the ice element. For now, I should follow his example and try using two manipulation methods to control my mana body's magic arrays. After thinking up to this point, Shi Feng began experimenting. Previously, he had been controlling the magic arrays on his mana body according to the mana body's construction because he believed this was the only way to manipulate the mana in his mana body. However, his thoughts changed after seeing the Ice World Saint using multiple mana manipulation methods to control the magic elements in his mana body. Master magicians like Shi Feng excelled in attacking from multiple fronts. Since he couldn't break through the 100% threshold by attacking from only a single front, he would try attacking from multiple fronts simultaneously, which would allow him to maximize the effects of every magic array. Subsequently, the intensity of the mana Shi Feng's body radiated fluctuated repeatedly. Sometimes, his mana didn't even reach the standard of ordinary Tier 3 players. Sometimes, it would far surpass the times he had fully exerted himself. He experimented for 3 consecutive hours and tested several dozen mana manipulation methods. From his experimentation, he concluded that using multiple methods simultaneously to manipulate his mana body was incredibly difficult. Even with his current concentration standard, he could just barely implement 3 at a time. However, the benefits of a threefold manipulation method were also evident. He had directly broken through the 100% threshold and reached the legendary 112% mark. Unfortunately, when implementing a threefold manipulation method, his mind would be so occupied that he couldn't execute a bronze combat technique, much less a mana technique. Hence, to maintain his combat power, Shi Feng had no choice but to abandon a threefold manipulation method for a twofold manipulation method. 87%. 102%. 99%. The completion rate of Shi Feng's mana body changed constantly. At the same time, the rate at which he expended his concentration also increased. This is the last option that suits me. I'll be satisfied so long as it goes beyond 103%. Of the various twofold manipulation methods Shi Feng had tried, the best one produced a result of 103%. However, he wasn't particularly satisfied with it. After all, he had already experienced what having a mana body with 112% of its potential unlocked felt like, and it was a truly amazing experience. Meanwhile, after combining the manipulation method of light-shadow, the mana technique he frequently used, with his original mana manipulation method and continuously refining the combination, he had produced what he deemed to be the best combination currently possible. If this one still didn't work, he would have no choice but to settle for the 103% manipulation method. Taking a deep breath, Shifeng opened his eyes abruptly and began manipulating the magic arrays inside his mana body. Immediately, the magic arrays began operating one after another, drawing upon the ambient mana in the room. The mana density around him increased steadily. 120%. 134%. 157%. As the density of the mana surrounding Shifeng increased, the sensitivity of his five senses also improved slightly. Although the improvement was minor, there was no doubt that they had improved. The next moment, the numerous magic arrays all over Shifeng's mana body began combining into a super-large magic array. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Boom. Suddenly, a ripple of mana spread from Shifeng's body and surged toward the surrounding walls. The mana inside the living room then stilled. However, a moment later, every bit of mana inside the room converged around Shifeng, a faint layer of mist forming around him. If one did not possess an acute sensitivity to mana, they would most likely have difficulty noticing this layer of condensed mana flowing over Shifeng's body. System, congratulations! You have successfully surpassed the mana body's 100% threshold and achieved a 110% completion rate. Chapter 2773, Mana Beyond the Limit. Upon hearing the system's voice ringing by his ears, Shifeng revealed a rare expression of joy. A 110% completion rate. Sure enough, integrating the mana manipulation method of mana techniques is the way to go. The mana manipulation method of light-shadow was much more refined than the methods he had thought up by himself, especially in the aspect of manipulating magic elements. His own manipulation methods utilized only the 4 major elements, while light-shadow utilized both the 4 major elements and the 7 supreme elements. Due to this difference, he had managed to unlock his mana body's potential to 110% with just a twofold manipulation method. And although there was only a 7% difference between this twofold manipulation method and his previous best method, past the 100% threshold, every 1% increase provided significant improvements to the mana body. The difference between a 103% mana body and 110% mana body was like the difference between heaven and earth. Subsequently, Shifeng punched at the empty space before him. Boom! All of a sudden, the living room's stable space shattered, spatial cracks forming one after another. Only after extending to the living room's wall and coming into contact with the magic barrier there did this phenomenon stop. What an amazing result! Shifeng was astonished as he looked at the fractured space before him. His mana body had truly undergone a qualitative transformation after reaching a 110% completion rate. Now, even his normal punches carried a hint of a mana technique's power. Moreover, he didn't even need to manipulate his mana actively to gain such an effect. Afterward, Shifeng closed his eyes and felt his surroundings. Even with his eyes closed, he could still perceive the entire room within his mind. Not even a speck of dust escaped his perception. Not only has my physique improved by at least 30%, but even my 5 senses have risen to the next level. In my present state, my perception is just slightly inferior to a demon prince's. Shifeng opened his eyes, an ecstatic look appearing on his face. Although he still wasn't Ferbero's equal in terms of physique and 5 senses, he was much closer to matching the demon prince than before. This was undoubtedly joyous news for him. Originally, he felt that a Tier 4 player needed a legendary weapon to contend with a Tier 4 demon prince. After all, the difference in physique between the two was massive. However, Shifeng now felt that it might just be possible for players to gain the astonishing physique of a demon prince while still at Tier 4. After all, his current mana body was only at a 110% completion rate, yet he was already close to matching a demon prince's physique. If he could push his mana body to the rumored 120% completion rate, his physique then might match that of a demon prince. Shifeng was relatively confident of pushing his mana body to a 120% completion rate. After all, he had already proven that utilizing multiple manipulation methods to control his mana body was the way to go. At the very least, he wouldn't be utterly clueless about how to develop his mana body, unlike before. All he needed to do was figure out how to improve on this aspect. Now that I've reached the limits of twofold manipulation, I'll need to raise my concentration standard so that I can execute threefold manipulation fluidly. This way, I'll have a high chance of achieving a 120% completion rate. At that time, whether it is that Divine Dragon's trial or that mysterious NPC, I won't be utterly helpless. At this point, confidence welled up within Shifeng. However, for safety's sake, I should first gather the Solomon's Sword fragments. If I have the complete Solomon's Sword, I won't have to fear going up against even true Tier 5 existences. After thinking up to this point, Shifeng felt that he needed to resolve his matters in the ancient era quickly and return to the modern era to secure the remaining 2 fragments of Solomon's Sword. Previously, he still hadn't been particularly confident of securing the 2 remaining fragments. However, now that his epic mana body had reached a 110% completion rate, he could probably solo even superior mythic monsters of the same level. The reason for his confidence was the qualitative transformation his mana had undergone. Originally, the mana flowing inside his mana body was merely gaseous, albeit of incredibly high density. However, after his epic mana body had reached a 110% completion rate, the mana flowing within it had thoroughly condensed into a mist. Moreover, it had achieved this state without him needing to manipulate external mana. Since God's domain's foundation was mana, the strength of a player's mana had a huge impact on their combat power, especially when using skills and spells. A skill powered with mist-like mana wouldn't just be 30% or 50% stronger than a skill powered with gaseous mana. Instead, the two would be on completely different levels. Why were superior mythic monsters so much more powerful than mythic monsters of the same level? It was because their physique and the quality of the mana inside their bodies were superior to ordinary mythic monsters. Currently, although Shifeng's physique still wasn't a match for superior mythic monsters, the quality of his mana was already on par with theirs. That, combined with the weapons and equipment he possessed, made it entirely possible for him to offset the difference and fight against superior mythic monsters on an equal footing. As Shifeng was immersing himself in the effects of his improved mana, Yuluo suddenly contacted him. Guild leader Black Flame, information on the Crystal of Souls has already spread across Meteorite City. Many player forces and even NPC forces have expressed interest in the crystal. All of them are requesting to purchase it at a high price, Yuluo said excitedly. The Skyflare Adventurer team, one of the top 3 player forces in the city, contacted me, saying they are willing to purchase the crystal for 150,000 magic crystals. If it were in the modern god's domain, 150,000 magic crystals would be equivalent to 60,000 gold. That was already enough money to arm a 100-man team to the teeth. In Meteorite City, 150,000 magic crystals could still fully gear a player in level 150 epic equipment. That won't be necessary. Since we said we would auction it, we will do just that. If they wish to buy it, they can buy it through the auction, Shifeng said, shaking his head. The offer of 150,000 magic crystals was indeed incredibly high. If the Crystal of Souls were to be auctioned in the modern god's domain, it definitely wouldn't sell for such a high price. In fact, it would be a miracle if he could sell it for 50,000 magic crystals. However, it was a different story in the ancient god's domain, where methods to recover from a mentally weakened state were incomparably rare. In fact, the streets of Meteorite City were littered with players in mentally weakened states. All of these players could only rely on the city's dense mana to slowly recover. After players fell into a mentally weakened state, a full recovery would take a very long time, even with the help of dense mana. If these players were willing to stay cooped up in Meteorite City without leaving to grind even once, they would still need around 2 weeks to recover. Yet, it was simply impossible for expert players to stay inactive for such a long period. A period of 2 weeks was already enough to create a huge gap between expert players. In fact, even dying twice wouldn't cost as much as remaining inactive for 2 weeks. Hence, an excellent recovery item like the Crystal of Souls was considerably precious to the ancient gods' domains players and NPCs. Meanwhile, his purpose in holding the auction this time was simply to find out the market price for the Crystal of Souls. Only after doing so could he maximize his profits. After all, he didn't have a lot of Crystals of Souls on hand since he didn't kill a lot of monsters that were 5 levels higher than himself and at the Great Lord rank or above. Not to mention, he would also use some of the crystals normally. As a result, he only had 43 Crystals of Souls saved up. On the other hand, he had plenty of soul water. At this time, he already had 2,764 drops accumulated. This was the fruit of long-term accumulation. Although he had given out a lot of soul water to the guild members using the bronze and silver legacy tablets, he still had a lot remaining. However, the soul water's effects were significantly inferior to those of the Crystal of Souls. If the Crystal of Souls couldn't sell for a high price, then the soul water naturally wouldn't sell for much either. But now that Skyflare is also competing for the Crystal of Soul, both player and NPC forces will most likely step aside out of respect for Skyflare. After all, aside from Skyflare's commander, one of Skyflare's vice-commanders is rumored to have also reached Tier 4 already, Yu Luo explained. She naturally understood Shifeng's thoughts. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU, the various powers won't pick a fight with Skyflare just for one Crystal of Souls. If you go through with the auction, I'm afraid it won't go for a high price. This world was different from the world they came from. The NPC cities here were separated by great distances. Only after reaching Tier 4 would players be able to travel between NPC cities without worry. Tier 3 players could only roam the vicinity of the main city they belonged to. This meant that players residing in the same city would often come across each other. Meanwhile, Tier 4 combatants were considered true powerhouses in God's domain. Even NPCs feared them greatly, all the more the player forces. If one angered the Skyflare adventurer team, one shouldn't even think about leaving the city to grind for levels anymore. A player force is suspected to have 2 Tier 4 players. Shifeng was surprised by this revelation. He never thought that the player forces in the ancient god's domain would be so powerful to actually have 2 Tier 4 players, one more than what Zero Wing had. Although the search for legacy lands played a huge factor in this disparity, it wasn't so easy for players to complete their Tier 4 promotion quest either. Immediately, he said, "How about this? I'll rent a hall at the auction house, and we'll organize a small auction of our own. Announce that we will be selling a total of 5 Crystals of Souls, in addition to 50 drops of soul water, which is a slightly inferior version of the crystals. If we do that Skyflare adventurer team will have difficulty monopolizing everything." Shifeng's words surprised Yu Luo. She never thought he would actually have other concentration recovery treasures besides the Crystal of Souls. He was practically a walking treasure trove. Moreover, if Shifeng were to sell so many Crystals of Souls and soul water, Skyflare would indeed have difficulty monopolizing everything. There was no way the various powers in the city would step aside in the face of such numbers. After all, aside from being useful for healing the mind, these treasures could also increase by a small margin one's odds of completing the Tier 4 promotion quest. Not to mention, Skyflare wasn't the only power in the city with Tier 4 combatants. Okay. I'll spread this information right away. Yu Luo nodded, then promptly disconnected the call. Shifeng notified Lifeless Thorn and the others of his plans before making his way toward Meteorite City's auction hall by himself. In the meantime, Yu Luo also spread the news regarding the Crystals of Souls and soul water, instantly causing a sensation throughout the city. Chapter 2774, Ancient Legacy Inheritor Meteorite City, Skyflare Hotel. The Skyflare Adventurer team was one of the top 3 powers of Meteorite City, and the Skyflare Hotel it owned was one of the city's landmarks. Not only did the hotel boast 19 floors, but it even occupied the largest plot of land in the city's business district, with roughly the footprint of a sports stadium. The Skyflare Hotel also had the best resting environment in Meteorite City. Due to its relatively reasonable prices, it had become the first choice of many players and NPCs for lodging. The hotel was so popular that it ranked within the top 10 most profitable businesses of Meteorite City. At this time, a level 131 female assassin clad in pitch-black epic equipment walked into the Skyflare Hotel's top-floor lounge. She then stopped before an imposing man sorting documents behind an office table. This imposing, middle-aged man was none other than the Skyflare Adventurer team's commander, Lionheart, nicknamed Raging Lion. "Commander, I've already looked into the person you mentioned. She's Yu Luo, a cleric from the Night Legion. She's the one responsible for spreading the information across the city. Not long ago, she made another announcement stating that her side will be hosting a small auction at the auction house. They will be selling 5 crystals of souls and 50 drops of soul water, which is an inferior version of the crystal of souls," the black-clad assassin reported. She then passed a memory crystal to Lionheart and continued, "There is a record of her image in there. From what I found out, she seems to be a proxy. The real seller should be the party of 5 people that entered Meteorite City with the Night Legion. I included a record of their appearances in the crystal. Of the 5, the cloaked man walking in the lead is verified to be a Tier 4 Sword Emperor. However, I did not find any records of him appearing within Meteorite City's vicinity." "Good job," said the crimson light armor-clad Lionheart, who had reached level 133. After glancing at the images recorded in the memory crystal, he nodded and looked toward the several vice commanders inside the lounge. He then asked calmly, "What do you guys think of this matter?" "They're simply picking a fight with Skyflare. We've already shown a lot of respect to that Sword Emperor by offering such a high price, yet they still refuse to reciprocate," sneered a gloomy man standing beside the French window. "I think we need to teach these outsiders a lesson. If they wish to mingle in Meteorite City, they need to know their limits. The treasure in question can increase the success rate of completing the Tier 4 promotion quest. We absolutely cannot let the other powers in the city get their hands on it." The 3 other vice commanders present nodded in agreement with the gloomy man, Wind Chaser. Although Wind Chaser was a cold and ruthless person, he was incredibly loyal to the Skyflare Adventurer team. Most importantly, Wind Chaser was a Tier 4 Nightwalker. When it came to assassination, he was undoubtedly the best player in Meteorite City. In terms of top combatants, the Skyflare Adventurer team was already the strongest player force in Meteorite City. Simply put, this was the best opportunity for the Skyflare Adventurer team to consolidate its grip on Meteorite City. Hence, how could they let other player forces gain an opportunity to rise up? Now that the several outsiders were showing no respect to their adventurer team, they definitely needed to teach these outsiders a lesson. It didn't matter even if the other party had a Tier 4 Sword Emperor on its side. After all, not only did Wind Chaser hold a peak hidden class, but he had even inherited a special mana technique. So long as he was hidden in the darkness, he could potentially one-shot even Tier 4 MTs, let alone a Tier 4 Sword Emperor. Well, let's go over and talk to him first. If we can agree on a good price, everybody can be happy. If not, it won't be too late to take action, Lionheart said after giving the matter some thought. Lionheart, too, agreed with Wind Chaser's opinion, especially about the Crystal of Souls, which could strengthen a player's soul by a small margin. After all, the strength of a player's soul would greatly affect their learning ability. Even a small boost to the soul would be a great help to players learning a Tier 4 skill or spell during their promotion quest. Hence, Skyflare had to obtain the Crystal of Souls. The 4 vice commanders present all nodded in agreement with Lionheart's decision. "Billow, find out that Sword Emperor's current location. I need to know right away," Lionheart ordered the black-clad assassin. "Commander, don't you know how I operate?" Smiling, the petite assassin named Crimson Billow added, "As soon as you told me to look into this matter, I set my sights on that Sword Emperor. Hence, I had people keep track of his every move. Currently, that Sword Emperor is at the auction house. By the looks of it, he plans to rent an auction hall to host a small auction." "Good." Lionheart nodded in satisfaction as he looked at Crimson Billow. Billow, you and Chaser will follow me in secret. I'll meet with that Sword Emperor in person and find out his origins and purpose. Truthfully, he felt very curious about the Sword Emperor mentioned. Tier 4 players were still incredibly rare in the current God's domain. According to Skyflare's information network, most main cities had only one Tier 4 player. The main cities with 2 or 3 Tier 4 players were all cities with massive populations. Logically, after a player reached Tier 4, the first thing they should do was expand their influence in their city as much as possible, capitalizing on their advantage. However, this foreign Sword Emperor had actually chosen to visit another city. It was simply inconceivable. Understood. Crimson Billow and Wind Chaser responded respectfully. Meteorite City, Auction House. Meteorite City was a large trade city, and the auction house could be said to be the most prosperous place here. Not only was the local auction house much larger than the ones found in the modern God's domain's royal capitals, but its visitor traffic was also massive. A huge variety of products was on sale, including mana ore, which was quite rare in the modern God's domain, sold by the stack at dastardly cheap prices. One stack of 200 mana ores cost only 49 magic crystals. If sold in the modern God's domain, it would be bought out instantly. After all, mana ore was a byproduct of certain ores, and the chances of acquiring it were low. Hence, the price of mana ore in the modern world was already close to 30 silver coins per piece. Even then, supply was still tight. It's a pity I can't travel freely between the two worlds. Otherwise, I could definitely make a killing, and Zero Wing wouldn't have to worry about lacking funds and resources anymore. Shifeng sighed ruefully as he looked at the available items in the auction house. According to the old man's words, only 10 people could visit the ancient God's domain at a time. Moreover, while first-time visitors could get in for free, the second visit onward had a price. It might be fine if the price was reasonable, but if it was exorbitant, his visits to the ancient era would be limited. Although he could leave the visits to other people, the importance of the ancient God's domain was too significant. If the Earthfall's secret land's secret got out, every superpower on the continent would either try to annihilate Zero Wing or compete for the secret land. Shifeng spent 500 magic crystals to rent a small auction hall that could fit 200 people, at most. For Meteorite City's various powers, this number was already more than enough. After Shifeng finished making the necessary arrangements, an imposing and mighty man suddenly approached him. The man was clad in crimson light armor and carried a knight's shield with crimson runes. At the appearance of this imposing man, silence descended momentarily on the entire auction house. Everyone looked at this man in surprise, a hint of awe and admiration gleaming in the eyes of both players and NPCs. Crap. It's Lionheart. He looks so handsome. He looks much better than the photo on Skyflare's promotional posters. But, why is a big shot like him here? Could it be because of the news of that small auction? A discussion over Lionheart promptly broke out in the auction hall. Everyone couldn't help wondering why a VIP like Lionheart would personally visit the auction house. Skyflare's commander. He actually came in person. Yu Luo, who had just arrived in the auction house, gaped in shock and doubted her eyes when she saw Lionheart enter the building. Lionheart was an amazing individual. Despite having started with nothing in this ruthless world, the adventurer team he established had grown to the point where it managed to defeat several large guilds and become one of the top 3 powers in Meteorite City. In terms of achievements, the Skyflare adventurer team easily eclipsed the Heaven's Blade adventurer team. On the interstellar continent, living resources were incredibly scarce. Ordinary civilians couldn't hope to compare with large guilds in terms of the resources they could acquire. This was because large guilds generally had high-level authorities as backers. These authorities boasted resources and influence far greater than those of the large guilds on Earth. Just one word from these high-level authorities would be enough to allow a civilian who could barely feed themselves to move to the interstellar continent's core area. In the core area, one would be able to not only eat like a king but also enjoy recreational activities in the real world and appreciate the beauty of the vast universe. Just this point alone allowed large guilds to walk over civilian players with no background. Meanwhile, Lionheart was only a civilian on the interstellar continent. His development of Skyflare to such an extent was a remarkable feat. He was practically a legend among the civilians there. If he were in the modern god's domain, he would definitely become a noteworthy existence known throughout the mainland. The next moment, Lionheart stopped before Shifeng. Immediately, everyone in the auction house focused on Shifeng curiously, the stares making him feel very uncomfortable. "You're the person selling the crystals of souls, right?" Looking at Shifeng, Lionheart went straight to the point, saying, "I am Lionheart, the Skyflare Adventurer Team's commander. You should have heard of me already." "Of course, I've heard of you. In fact, I've heard a lot about you." Shifeng did not deny Lionheart's statement. Calmly, he asked, "May I know what business you have with me?" Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Shifeng had gained plenty of information regarding Lionheart. The man was undoubtedly a powerhouse. Not only did he reach the domain realm, but he had even set foot onto the second step, the upper domain realm. The amount of time he had spent immersed in virtual reality games was much greater than that of the modern God's Domain's players. Rumor had it that Lionheart's control over mana had already reached the advanced Master Magician standard and that he was only half a step away from becoming a Grandmaster. In addition, Lionheart also possessed an ancient hidden class called the Blood Knight, which gave him the strongest defense among players. At this point, he was a complete monster when it came to defense. His terrifying defense was why the Skyflare Adventurer Team had managed to conquer plenty of powerful bosses. The Adventurer Team had even killed quite a few level 120 superior mythic bosses. Hence, Lionheart was also known as Meteorite's Wall by Meteorite City's players. "This isn't a place to talk. Why don't we find a place to sit down and have a proper conversation?" Lionheart suggested as he scrutinized Shifeng. When he saw Shifeng's special state, he was surprised and confused. However, he quickly set aside his surprise and treated Shifeng with the respect due a foreign Tier 4 expert. "Sure." Shifeng nodded. He then turned to the empty space a short distance behind Lionheart and asked, "Are those two coming along too?"